As an adult, don't we all miss spring break? Nothing like taking a week off from all your responsibilities. Well, here's the next best thing for adults, a spring break from house payments. SaveWithConrad.com can help you get rid of all your credit card debt, just like that. We're routinely helping our listeners save $5, $6, $7, even $800 a month. And you don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket to do this, but check this out, no house payments for 2 months at SaveWithConrad.com. NMLS number 2129, equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. John, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing great, Conrad. You got March Madness. You got baseball has started back up. I'm just like a pig in knee-deep mud.
Well, we're excited to be here with you. We are pumped that we're getting to sit down with you and talk a little old school wrestling today. We're going to talk about that weird time when the WWF decided, hey, what if we brought the NWA back and made it part of WWE programming? That feels make-believe. The NWA being featured on a WWF show, that would have been unfathomable just a few years prior to this, wasn't it, John?
Yeah, completely unfathomable. But I think a lot happened with WCW. You know, we're getting killed by Bischoff and WCW with the invasion angle. We're getting killed with Bischoff and WCW with the Japanese angle. And so because of that, I think Vince felt like he had to compete, you know, because we were getting beat. I mean, this was, you know, we're in danger right before this time of being run out of business. And I think Vince thought he needed to compete, and, you know, who do you compete with? So he created the ECW angle, and then he created the NWA angle. You know, they sent me and Windham to Japan to try to create the Japanese angle, which did not work. So I think this was a response to WCW.
So talk to me about, you know, you said they sent me and Windham to Japan. What was the Japan angle that didn't work that you're trying to? I'm not really following exactly what you mean with you and Windham.
Sure, I'm sorry. I've told it before, but I maybe have not told this show, so it's fresh to me. But it's obviously, you know, you can't read my mind, and like you'd want to. It might be worse than reading Bruce's. that'd be like, oh my God, too much. So, but what happened was right after the Montreal screw job. So 2 days after the Montreal screw job, Barry Windham had arranged for us to go to the tag team tournament for All Japan. You know, he had a great relationship with Baba. I wanted to get a job in Japan because my contract was coming up. This was around November, I believe, Survivor Series. So it had to be, my contract was up either December or January. I didn't think they were going to re-sign me. And so I wanted to get a job in Japan. Barry had in mind to be the liaison between Baba and Vince. And it wasn't just Barry that came up with that. JR came up with that, or at least JR is the one that told us about it. JR told us that, you know, they need a liaison. We want to deal with All Japan. And Barry was going to be that guy. Now, we didn't realize that John Laurinaitis, had a very close tie-in with the Japanese office, and that position was already filled, and there wasn't a chance for Barry to take that position because that position already existed. But what Vince wanted was to us, and this is all coming through what JR and Vince told us specifically, we want you guys to forge a relationship with Japan so that we can work with those guys. You know, they wanted access to Albright. They wanted access to Stan. They wanted access to Doc, to Kabashi, to Masawa. You know, they wanted access to that, very similar to what WCW had. So we were the ones that were sent over kind of as an olive branch, sent over to Baba to forge that relationship. And that was what we were supposed to come out of with that. And I think we would have, except for what I said, that Laurinaitis was already in that position. They still kind of tried to do it, but that's when everything changed after the Montreal screw job.
Of course, as 97 is winding down, we know that, you know, things are changing in the WWF. Of course, the Montreal screw job means that Brett is out of here and Vince is looking for his next big idea. We're going to see what that is in January of 98 with Mike Tyson. But while he's focused, he being Vince, pronouns, pal, while Vince is focused on
Dusty one time was like, he did this, and Vince goes, he, pronouns, pal. Who you talking about? Vince goes, well, Dusty says, well, it's not the guy outside the ring. Obviously, it's the man in the ring. What are you thinking? And Vince is like, pronouns. And then they're just bickering with each other. It's great. What
year was that when you heard that conversation?
That was when Dusty was there in, it had to be, what, 2000? When he came back.
Yeah, that's interesting that would have happened so much after his in-ring career. But
Yeah, when he came back and Dusty was telling Vince something about I don't know if he's part of creative or what. And I don't remember that because Dusty came back, several times. Dusty kind of moved around a lot. And when he came back, it was that they had that conversation.
Did you spend much time with Dusty? You and I haven't spent a lot of time talking about Dusty. I know that Vince McMahon's sort of philosophy on wrestling and brand of wrestling, and you can tell just when you see something based on your relationship with Vince and spending so much time in close proximity with him that, hey, this is the type of stuff Vince would like, or, oh, Vince would love that. Did you spend much time with Dusty and learn sort of his taste on wrestling and things like that?
Yeah, and I've got to be careful here because everybody who knows Dusty will tell you, man, I was one of Dusty's best friends. Dusty was one of my best friends, which they were. Dusty was that guy. Dusty was that type of guy. Whenever you met Dusty, he made you feel like you're the most important guy in the world. So everybody who talks about Dusty, go through anybody talking about Dusty. They tell you how much Dusty meant to them and how close they were to Dusty. And if you count all of them up, Dusty had hundreds of very close friends, but he did. Legitimately, he made everybody feel special. He made me feel special just like everybody else. I tagged with his old partner, Murdoch, and rode the roads up in Texas with Dick Murdoch. And so I had a little different connection to Dusty than most because of the tie with Dick. And so, yeah, when I was around Dusty, we talked all the time. We had a really good time because we're both from West Texas. We both had this love for Murdoch, and we both had a lot of the same friends. So I had I think a pretty close relationship with Dusty. I don't want to overstate it that we were super close friends, but we were good friends. I tell you a great story. We were in I was meeting with some Wall Street guys, and it was one of the only bankers that didn't take a bailout. So he was like, man, he was the cream of the crop, and he had a 3-story penthouse in New York. He had his car would be in a elevator they'd bring up and store, so he didn't have to go to the parking garage. Worth a fortune. So my wife tells me, says, hey, we're going to this party, and just kind of understand these guys may kind of be stuck up guys. You may not be, you may not have much fun. I said, okay, that's fine. I'm used to, guys that like that. They may not have anything in common with me. That's fine. So I'm just sitting there at the party. Anyway, this guy finally asked me, he says, hey, do you ever run into Dusty Rhodes?
Wow.
And now this is the guy, and this is the question he asked me after being an hour at the party. I said, you were running into Dusty Rhodes? And I said, yeah. I said, Dusty's a good friend. He stopped the party with all of these Wall Street Titans, and you would know every name that was there. It was a private party. And he goes, this guy knows Dusty Rhodes. He was like a little kid. He goes, tell me about Dusty Rhodes. Tell me about Dusty Rhodes. So I tell him Dusty stories. I told him all kinds of stuff. They had the best time talking Dusty Rhodes. So we had the Hall of Fame coming up in Madison Square Garden. And I said, hey, would you like to come to the show and meet Dusty Rhodes? Because this guy was, Vince obviously knew him. He's one of the Wall Street bigwigs. And he said, oh my God, I got a meeting. And so anyway, I'd go to the Hall of Fame that night. And I've got this picture of me with Dusty, and I've still got it. I'll send it to Stud Muffin, our Dave Silva, and so he can post it up. And I sent the picture to him, and I said, "Hey, I'm here with Dusty. We just need you." He sent me back a picture of him with Warren Buffett.
Oh my God!
He was literally the reason he couldn't come because he was making $1 billion acquisition of a financial company that night, and he said, "I'd rather be there." My God, I showed it to Dusty. I said, look at this. And I explained to Dusty who it was. It was like, dude, Dusty goes, why don't he send me some money? That's a good idea.
Isn't it interesting? You've probably at least been around or heard this, but I find it interesting that we have all this negative perception about wrestling fans and wrestling fandom, specifically about Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, and those characters sort of pierce through all of that, and you never know. Like I can just speak from mortgage experience. Like when I first started talking about my mortgage company here on the podcast, I think a lot of people assumed, that we were targeting a certain type of audience, but we did so many doctor loans and attorney loans, and I mean, people who have, tried cases in front of the Supreme Court. Astrophysicists, crazy stuff, but wrestling sort of brings us all together. And I just think it's interesting that even when you're, rubbing shoulders with guys who have Warren Buffett's phone number. Wrestling still resonates with them. It's not because we always hear the criticism as wrestling fans. Oh, well, nobody wants to advertise their product on wrestling. Wrestling's hard to sell to advertisers. And I think that's because there's a negative connotation of, I don't know, wallet chains and tattoos or something. But the reality is almost every man in America at one point or another watched wrestling as a kid, and they have a soft spot for it. There's just no way around that, I don't think.
No, I don't either. And when I worked on Wall Street, I worked on Wall Street for about 3 years, and I worked in the corner of Water and Wall for a little boutique investment bank. I'd go, Stone Street was the oldest street, I believe, at least in New York. And that's where 85 Broad was, where Goldman Sachs was. And when Goldman would hit a deal, man, that street was rocking. I mean, rocking. Those guys had expense accounts. The girls would come in from Long Island, from New York, from the boroughs, because they knew that the young guys there had plenty of money and they were going to spend plenty of money that night. And it was fun to go down there because it was right by where my office was. And I go down there, and these guys are having this huge party. I was like the celebrity there because I was a wrestler. Wow. They all loved wrestling, and they'd all tell you stories about growing up watching wrestling in the Garden, yes, about all they went to. It was unbelievable. I completely agree. I don't know if it came out of the, as I don't know if you call it the dark ages of wrestling, where people thought we were just in VW halls and high school gyms, but the perception is nowhere close to what the reality is.
It's interesting to think about how much wrestling has changed. And that's really what we're talking about today, is the way wrestling used to be in late 1997. Of course, we're telling the story about what you're doing in your career here. You and Barry Windham had a fun, but maybe largely rather uneventful run as the new Blackjacks. But you do get to check that box of going to All Japan like you laid out during their Real World Tag League tournament. You're even going to be able to do some of the house shows. And then when you come back, you're working with the New Age Outlaws, and you're challenging for the WWF Tag Team titles. So even though you felt like, hey, maybe, my contract's coming due, I might need to think about what I'm going to do next, it feels like a vote of confidence to have you working with the tag champs. But then a monkey wrench gets thrown into the mix because Barry gets drafted into this, what would wind up being a dead-end NWA invasion. So, of course, what they've done on the other channel is with the NWO. Once upon a time, before Vince was battling the NWO, he was battling the NWA with Jim Crockett Promotions. So I guess this idea is born out of Jim Cornette preferring the more traditional way of presenting wrestling programming, and maybe Russo wanted to be a little more cutting edge and things like that. Is that the way you've always understood the whole NWA opportunity to come to be, that Vince Russo saw things the New Age way, and Cornette was always saying, no, this is the way it used to be. And so they wanted to maybe placate Cornette with the NWA. Is that the way you understand?
No, I didn't see it that way at all. I saw the notes you had about me checking a box going to Japan. It was a great honor to go over there and work with Doc and Stan and those guys and work for the big company, but it wasn't checking a box. I was going for a job. There was a big difference. My contract was up. I didn't think I'd get re-signed, and I would have got a job there. It's just when I came back, that's when everything had changed, and you weren't getting guaranteed contracts for people when I left, not for people like me. You got a few people that you signed, they brought over. I think Mark Merrill was the first guaranteed contract, but guys weren't getting guaranteed contract. I had no belief that I was going to get a contract. And then when I came back, the world had changed after the Montreal screw job. Now they were worried about losing anybody. And so that's when, I ended up getting a nice, it was a 5-year long-term deal, more money than I by far. I mean, a huge multiple of what I'd ever made in my life. So everything had changed. So by the time the NWA angle came, I was under contract. They were using me. But when you talk about whether this was something with Russo and Cornette, I can't speak to that. My belief is certainly that it was not, that it was Vince. We needed something to counter WCW. And I'll deal with the issues, the problems with it, why it would never have succeeded, ever. But they had done all these invasion angles. They had done all this stuff. We didn't have any of that. All of a sudden we have Steve that's gotten hot. We didn't know what to do with him because we didn't know he's going to get hot when he did. bringing in Tyson, we needed something. And I think that more came from Vince, my opinion. And that's the opinion of everybody back then as well. And those the guys that were in the angle, that this came from Vince to kind of counter what WCW was doing.
So when you get the news, I mean, how do you find out, hey, this new Blackjack thing, that's dead. They're pushing Barry in this. Are you wondering, hey, well, how's that work for Barry? And more importantly, where the hell does that leave me?
No, because when I came back from Japan, my answer machine was full. And it was JR, and he was wanting to sign me to a deal. And I've told you the story. I had a horrible concussion. Kobashi caught me with a clothesline just by mistake in the carotid artery, and I had this horrible concussion. I couldn't go to TV because I was scared I couldn't fly. I was all the way up in Maine. I was in Texas. That's about a 3.5, 4 hour flight. I didn't want to get on a plane again because my head was hurting so bad. I literally could hardly sit up straight. And so when JR asked me to come to Maine, I said, give me some time off. I just got back from Japan. He thinks that I'm negotiating with him. He went from 2 years. He went from 2 years to 3 years in the same conversation and raised the money. I think he thinks that. Now I don't want to speak for JR. He's one of your guys. You can ask him the question himself. I'm just telling you what happened, from my perspective on my side of the phone. I couldn't go because of my concussion. Well, then JR says, hey, we're going to give you a 3-year deal. I'd never dreamed that I would get a guaranteed contract. I'm being offered this contract, but I've got this concussion. I can't get on the plane. I'm scared to go up there. I'm scared that when I get up there, they may ask me to work. I can't work because of this concussion. So I tell JR, finally, I said, JR, let me be honest with you. I said, I've been in Japan for 5-6 weeks. I've been out with Stan and Bobby every night and Doc drinking. And I said, I'm not in shape, and I'm not tanned. I'm not nothing. I'm look terrible. If I'm going to sign a new contract, give me some time to get back in shape. And I can't tell him I got the concussion. So he said, let me call you back. He called me back and gave me a 5-year deal.
Oh my God.
And now it's more, I mean, literally it's 5 times my 5th year, because it's a progressive deal from the start to the finish. My 5th year is like 5 times what I'd ever made in 1 year in my life. About 5.5 times. I'm in shock. This is more money. I've never dreamed I'd get something like this. So I tell JR, I said, listen, here's what I'll do. I will go down, because back then you had to get faxes, somewhere in town. I mean, nobody that I knew of had a fax machine. So I had some businesses downtown that would take a fax for me. I said, send a fax. I think it was a local bank that my dad used to work at. I said, send a fax down to the bank. And I said, I'll go down and get it. And I said, I'll sign a binding MOU that will guarantee that I'm going to sign this contract. You sign your end. And I said, but give me a month off to get in shape. I'm trying to get over this concussion because I'm damaged goods. They would have never signed me if they knew I had this concussion. So right. JR said, okay, it's going to be there in the next few minutes. He said, if you'll go down there right away and sign it, we've got a deal. So I went down, brother. I broke every speed limit in the little town, get down, red every stop sign, red light. I go in there and I tell the guy, he's my buddy. I say, hey man, I got a fax coming. Stop everything. Get this fax. I'm gonna sign it and send it back. I said, I just got a contract. And the guy goes, really? I said, yes. I'm rich. So yeah, so I got this contract, sent it right back. And when I talked to JR during that time, and he was wonderful to talk to, by the way. JR always treated me fantastic. And he told me, so we got some big plans for you. I knew that point that the tag team with Barry was over. So I went to Royal Rumble, was the first match that I had back. And I was the ultimate guy. Conrad's the worst thing in the world. Like, okay, John, you're going to be there over half an hour. We're going to give you a good push. But then we're going to do the finish for the last 4 guys. John, you can leave now. Let's do the finish. You realize you're just filler. You're just filler in there. But I've got to go about something over half an hour in the Rumble, whatever it was. It was a long time. And I'm worried that I hadn't taken a bump yet because of this concussion. And it turned out it was fine. I was over the concussion. Everything was good. But I rode with Barry that night. We were in, I think, San Jose. I rode with him somewhere down south. And I remember I was cramping like crazy because I was out there in that Rumble so long. And Barry was laughing at me for cramping. But we both knew at that point that the tag team was pretty much over. They hadn't done anything with us. You've got this great NWA champion, the great Barry Windham, and, you're not doing anything with us. There's no reason to believe they're going to do anything going forward. It
is fascinating to think about how much different the business was back then. Do you assume, because you said early on in the conversation that you felt like when you said, hey, give me some time to get in shape, that perhaps JR thought you were negotiating. And I remember back when you first signed, back in 96, it was said, hey, if we don't sign him today, he's going to meet with WCW tomorrow. Allegedly, that's what Briscoe told Vince McMahon, and Vince said, we'll sign him. Do you think they were concerned, given all the momentum on the other channel, that you two may be jumping ship?
Yeah, and I don't think they're that concerned about Justin Hawk Bradshaw leaving. I mean, to be, honest and fair, I wasn't a name that did anything. I was on every show. I worked every first match, worked with Bob Holly a lot and loved every second of it. Worked almost every pay-per-view in some respect, but they weren't using me. And I don't think they cared about me leaving before the Montreal screw job. It's just after. I think they thought we can't afford to lose anybody. And they knew I would go somewhere. I was going to Japan. I don't think they knew that. I was going to Japan was where I was going, not WCW. WCW hadn't talked to me, which, by the way, I always wondered, and I'd love to ask JR this. When I walked through Narita on the way home with that concussion, I ran into Eric Bischoff in the bar at Narita Airport and sat there and talked to him for about 30 minutes. He was nice as he could be. He didn't offer me a job, didn't offer me nothing, which to this day I hate him because of that. But and have a lot of bad feelings toward Bischoff because of that. But he didn't offer me a job. He didn't offer nothing. A lot of the boys saw me talking to Bischoff. I don't know if that got back to the office or not. It's a great story if it did. That hey, John had his secret meeting in Narita, which I don't think Bischoff would fly all the way to Narita for Justin Hawk Bradshaw, but it made me feel good that maybe somebody thought that. But yeah, I think JR thought I was going somewhere else. Because I kept saying, no, I don't want to come. I don't want to come. And he offered me more and he offered me more. He's, one of your guys. So you certainly could ask him. I don't know his point of view. That's what I thought. But I know it did go from 2 years to 5 years in the same day.
Man, my man got a bump.
And the money went up. The money went up significantly.
I love that.
I think JR just couldn't afford to have a loss. Even with me, I think they thought they had plans with me. I think they thought I could do something, even though they hadn't done much with it. They'd used me, but I wasn't on upward, progression or anything at the time. I just think they thought they couldn't lose anybody because they had lost too much already. We were losing people like right and left down there. The only person we got back, I believe at that time, was Mark Merrill. So we only got one person back out of losing, 3 or 4 of the best stars of all time.
Well, some of the best stars of our childhood were those big bowls of delicious cereal every Saturday and Sunday morning when we would turn on old school wrestling. You could almost taste the nostalgia when I bite into Magic Spoon. Big fan, big believer, day one user of Magic Spoon here on the program. They had me at nostalgia. That's what this show is all about. And I think a lot of us still watch wrestling and listen to these nostalgia podcasts because we remember what was going on in our lives back then. And I don't know, it just feels like home. It feels familiar. It feels comfortable. That's what Magic Spoon really is all about. They realize that as we get older, hey, we don't need a big bowl of sugar. We need a big bowl of protein. And by now you already know that Magic Spoon has high protein, zero sugar cereal and treats. You've heard me brag on those treats that are crispy, crunchy, and airy. They really are an easy way to get 12 grams of protein on the go. I've mentioned they've got the classic marshmallow flavor that tastes just like the ones Mom used to make. They've also got chocolate peanut butter, which is a favorite in the Jarrett household. But I like the double chocolate, and I double dog dare you to try it. And I want to mention Magic Spoon has also launched a brand new high-protein granola. And true to that classic Magic Spoon promise, it's packed with protein and oh so crunchy. It's got delicious flavors like dark chocolate almond and honey almond and peanut butter. And right now you can get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/wrestle. Or look for Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. That's magicspoon.com/wrestle for $5 off. So listen, we know that you're getting the big contract. And so now we're wondering what the hell they're going to do with Barry. How do you receive the news that, they're going to make him a single star? How do you think Barry felt about that? I mean, he certainly had been with the company. I guess at this point, there's like 3 iterations. We all remember back in the early 90s, he had the Widowmaker run. He comes back in 96 and he tries the Stalker thing. By 97, we're trying to do the new Blackjacks concept. And now we're back to Barry, the singles competitor, not as a Widowmaker, not as a Stalker, just as Barry Windham, the former NWA world champion. He's going to get thrown in there with Jeff Jarrett on television. This is going to happen at the very end of 1997. And they've got Jim Cornette coming out with Dennis Corluzzo and Howard Brody as the president and vice president of the NWA. And they're mentioning, the legacy and history of this organization with great champions like Lou Thez and Harley Race. But this is during the Attitude Era. So this is not necessarily well received. What did I know you don't know for sure, maybe, but maybe y'all had a conversation. What do you imagine Barry felt about, wait, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I had Barry's first match back as the stalker. Jake Roberts was the agent. I remember because I think I just met Barry, and I'm a huge fan of Barry Windham, and I just remember looking at Barry and I thought, man, he hates this gimmick, which I don't blame him. I mean, you're the future, you're the NWA champion and would have been it forever if you don't blow out your knee, and all of a sudden now you're putting this stalker gimmick. I mean, that thing was the shits. That was terrible. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what you thought that Barry Windham could do with that. I mean, Barry Windham's one of the all-time greats. That was a horrible gimmick, and I think Barry knew it at the time. Barry didn't like it. I could tell. I could tell by sitting there with him I just met him for the first time, but I could tell him when Jake Roberts was going over being a stalker and all this stuff. And Barry was just like, "You got to be kidding me!" And I don't know if that was a dark match or what, but that was the first match with the stalker as Barry Windham. And Barry, when he was a tag team with me, there were times he looked like the old Barry Windham, but Barry didn't suffer fools. And if Barry knew you didn't care, he didn't care. And he's a stand-up dude. Barry Windham is one of the best guys I've ever met. He is a terrific human being, but he didn't put up with idiots. And so when people tried to BS him about, we're going to do this, we'll do that, Barry saw through it, and Barry just didn't suffer fools. And I think that was part of the issue, was say, oh, he doesn't care. No, he cares. He just thinks you're an idiot. He doesn't want to deal with you.
From what I understand, and again, I don't even know if this is true, Barry Windham wasn't even the first choice. I think they were supposed to have Jeff Jarrett wrestle Doug Furnace that night. Doug sees his name on the sheet and realizes, hey, they're putting me in a tag match for the NWA, and I'm going to lose to Jarrett. I don't know if I want to do that. And he leaves. Now, that's the one narrative. The other thing I've heard is he didn't see his name on the sheet and thought, well, I'm not booked, so I leave. That, to me, makes more sense, that because how many times have we all heard that guys are going to show up to TV and then they're not needed? This is not the era of guaranteed big money contracts either. So it's not like they're just going to hang around until they're needed. If they made the town and are now told, hey, you're not booked, well, I'm getting to the next town. I'm getting the hell out of here. Do you remember, or have you ever heard what the hell happened with Doug Furnace? Because I think from reading the Observer, he was a regular reader of the Observer and he was in touch with Dave. So I kind of believe the idea that he didn't think he was booked and he left early. Have you heard about that mix up? And that's how Barry became sort of the substitute for Doug Furnace? Because it doesn't even feel like Barry was maybe the first choice.
No, I hadn't heard it, but I know Doug well, or I knew Doug well, and we worked with him a ton of times. And Doug doesn't have a problem putting people over, especially when you're a new gimmick with the NWA. I'd find that almost impossible to believe that Doug refused to do the job, because back then, if you refuse to do the job, you're fired. I mean, Vince doesn't put up with that. I mean, you're done. You see ya. He will, as he would say, I will gleefully fire you, which it's just great to hear that baritone voice say, I will gleefully fire you. So he would have gleefully fired him. I don't believe that with Furnace one bit. Furnace was a really good dude. He knew it was a work, tough guy, unbelievable power lifter. Wrestled with Furnace a lot. Great team. I think they could have done so much more with Furnace on the fly. I do not believe that Furnace left because he was doing a job. I think Furnace left because, as a lot of us did, when we didn't see ourselves booked, we would leave. And at times that came back to bite us when all of a sudden they needed us.
It is interesting to take a look and think that, based on what we're seeing, if Doug really does not see that he's booked and leaves, it maybe changes. I don't know. I wish Barry wouldn't have been on TV at that moment in this spot, because I was just such a big fan of Barry and certainly of the new Blackjacks. Before we move on here for a minute for the NWA, I do want to ask, or from Barry Windham at least, when you're thinking about Barry Windham's career as an outsider, I think a lot of people take a look and see, hey, he did gangbusters for Dusty in the NWA during the Crockett territory. He tries his hand with Vince. It doesn't really work. He comes back to WCW when they're in a down period, becomes the NWA champion, eventually Flair's back. They're going to wrestle. Flair is the champ. I guess we can't really argue that. But it feels like Barry just sort of floats around post 93 before he lands with the company here. And the knock on Barry, the narrative on Barry was, hey, he's the most natural talent, but maybe he struggles with motivation. And you said it maybe a minute ago, he doesn't suffer fools. He didn't want to play the bullshit game.
Yep.
In an alternate universe, almost everyone whose opinion about wrestling I respect, they say he was arguably the best wrestler in the world by 86. And we would see even in WCW, he had a pretty fun run with the whole West Texas Rednecks and Rap is Crap and all that. But even in 2001, once WCW's folded, Dusty starts running his own independence, Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling. And he picks up the phone and calls Barry. Barry gets himself in shape and has a really fun series of matches for Dusty on the Independence in 2001 that nobody talks about and nobody has seen. Do you think Barry became disillusioned with the way he thought his career was going to go and then it didn't go that way? Or was he a third generation wrestler or whatever it was and is like, hey, man, this is a job. I'm not going to get too caught up in the titles and all that. How many dates? How much money? See you down the road.
Yeah, I think more the latter. You know, Barry was very businesslike, but Barry loved the business. I mean, Barry, I cannot tell you what a fun guy Barry Windham was. Everybody loves Barry Windham. He had one of the highest tolerances you've ever seen for anything. I've never seen a guy drink more than Windham and be apparently sober. It's just, Barry was a fun dude. Everybody loved Barry Windham. But literally, it wasn't. I don't buy any of that bullshit that Barry was disinterested. Barry lacked motivation. I don't buy any of that. None of it. And I rode with him for over a year. Barry did not suffer fools. And he did not like people who tried to work him. He did not like people who tried to say, "Oh, Barry, we're going to do this." He knows their line. Barry saw through everything. Barry was an incredibly smart guy. He was a fantastic buyer of cars, and if you're buying cars, you know how to negotiate with sharks. Barry could do that. Barry was a really sharp, smart guy. He just didn't suffer fools. And when he had guys he thought that was either looking down on him or trying to work him, Barry didn't give a shit. And he would make that known. And I got a lot of respect for that.
It's super interesting to hear your take on Barry Windham because you knew him better than, everyone listening to this for the most part does. But it's so different from the perception that's out there about him. I do want to ask about the perception of starting this new angle too. I think most people agree by this point, respectfully, 1998, the NWA was a dead brand. Like nobody had talked about this in a long time. It's not hot. It's not new. And I know that's one of the reasons the NWO hit is it felt new. It felt fresh. It felt different. This feels more tired and more familiar. It's just not the same. I'm saying all of that to say you have that stigma that you're running up against. And now, we're going to see that, hey, the championship match is going to be decided between Jeff Jarrett and Barry Windham. And respectfully, Barry had been a tag wrestler on TV most recently. And Jeff Jarrett had not exactly been setting the woods on fire. He's trying to reestablish himself as a new character. But once Jeff wins the match, they have Stone Cold come out, stun him, and mock him with the big strut. And I'm sure Jeff at the time thought, well, hey, maybe this means I'm going to be doing something with Austin. But knowing with the benefit of hindsight, Austin had no intention of ever working with Jeff. Like booking this way feels intentional. Hey, we're going to shit on this from the start, which is why there's so many wrestling fans who believe, hey, Vince Russo thought maybe I can placate Cornette and embarrass Cornette by saying, hey, this is what you think will work. Well, we'll just push it out there this way. But even as they first try it, well, we're going to shit on it. We're going to have Stone Cold stun it and strut across. Like as a wrestler watching this, did you just realize when you see that, oh, they have no serious intention of pushing this?
Of course, yeah. You had great people and great workers, and the angle was sucked. It was terrible. And I don't buy what you said about who created it. It was Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon, it's his show. And this has got Vince's fingerprints all over it. This Vince McMahon, think about
the shit on the NWA.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it wasn't like it was a secret. It was overt. It was right there. I mean, you have the NWA champion, and all of a sudden you have Stone Cold come out there and just leave the guy laying and do the strut and make fun of him. I mean, and I guess that was the NWA North American Championship, right?
Yeah,
it wasn't,
that's right.
Yeah, which is I took the last title off of Kevin Von Erich that he held, the North American NWA Championship. So shout out to my friend Kevin and one of my idols. But think about the invasion angles. Think about the invasion angles that Vince McMahon ran. And this is Vince McMahon. Forget all that other anybody else. This is Vince McMahon. You had ECW come in. Who do they go in against? Do they come in against Stone Cold? The Undertaker? They coming against Shawn Michaels? They coming against The Rock? No. They came in against Bradshaw is who they came in against, and Savio Vega. And so that's the angle. You have the NWA. Who do you come in against? Now, who worked with them? With the first guys that working from WWE? Justin Hawk Bradshaw again. I mean, this is so far beneath the main event level. Vince is not going to use his main stars for this because he's not going to put over the brand, period. He wanted an invasion angle. He had a great invasion angle with ECW. He's not going to put him out there. Now, later they use Steve in certain things, when they talk about 04 and 05, when they basically bought ECW, they use Steve for that. But unless you are a WWE guy, talking about the invasion coming in, Vince isn't going to use you. He's going to find a way to use it as an interesting angle. It's going to fizzle out. Every single one of them did. But there's no way he puts his stars on the line against any of these angles.
But when you're doing this, you're not necessarily doing this with NWA talent. You're doing this with a freshly signed Jeff Jarrett, who just came over in October. And now here we are 2 months in. Hey, we're putting a belt on him, but it's not a belt anyone at home is familiar with on this program. And oh, by the way, here comes the top guy to just show ass and dunk on him. Like, that just feels like, I get what we're saying about, hey, we're not really going to prioritize the invasion. But this time we're doing the wink, wink invasion with our own guys and killing them in the process. Is Jarrett just caught in the crossfire here, do you think? Absolutely.
Yeah, look at how Jeff Jarrett was used when he's representing the NWA as compared to how he was used when he was representing the Intercontinental Championship.
That's right.
When he was being used for representing the WWE titles, they used him as they should. One of the all-time greats. I love Jeff, and I do think he's one of the all-time greats. I still think he is. They used him in a great way, but Vince is not going to. Vince ran the NWA out of business. He's not going to bring them back and give them any cachet that they can take that title and go somewhere else with. There's absolutely zero chance that's going to happen. It's not going to happen with ECW. It's not going to happen with NWA. And if he had got a deal with Baba, it wouldn't happen with the Japanese guys either.
There's a lot of our listeners who've decided that they don't like Jeff Jarrett. And I have to admit, once upon a time, I was among them. I nicknamed him on this program years ago, the human fast forward button. Because I was not Jeff Jarrett.
Hey, he's the leader of the Four Horsemen, isn't he?
He is, by God. But what's interesting is I talk to people who are in the wrestling space. I mean, guys who actually wrestled like yourself. And I would continually hear high praise and compliments for Jeff Jarrett. And I only landed on the idea that, hey, perhaps wrestlers watch wrestling differently than fans do. They're watching it through the eyes of a performer rather than through the eyes of a fan. So putting on your performer lens for a minute, you just sort of doubled down and said, hey, Jeff's one of the all-time greats. What was it about Jeff's work that you saw through a wrestler lens that led you to that conclusion that, hey, this dude's really good?
He could do anything. He didn't have to have a certain style. Certain guys with certain styles, you have to work to their style. And I worked, thousands of matches. And sometimes you have a guy, you realize, okay, I got to figure out what his style is because I've got to figure out how I'm going to help him get over working his style. Jeff was one of those guys that was sitting there figuring out other people's styles because he could do anything. He could do anything with a lucha guy. He could do anything with a guy like a Brody. He could do anything with a guy that's a wrestler. I mean, Jeff could do anything. And he's one of the guys that would figure out styles to have matches that are good with people that are limited because Jeff wasn't limited. Jeff's one of these great pros. And he's not like a mechanic he is a mechanic in the truest sense of the term that he can work with absolutely anybody. But it's not a guy like a mid-card guy that can work with anybody. Jeff's a guy who can take somebody and work on the top level with guys that couldn't work. And I've got a lot of respect for that.
I do want to talk about some of the other names involved in this sort of NWA angle, because we're going to see names being mentioned in the newsletters like, hey, Dan Severn's not coming in just yet. There's no plans for that, but they do plan to bring in the Dirty White Boy, who we know Tony Anthony had a great run with Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They brought him to the big show and made him respectfully an enhancement type character, but he did have a gimmick. He was TL Hopper. He was the plumber character, but also Ricky.
Vince loved that character, by the way, as you can imagine.
Tell us about that, because you were there for those sort of silly gimmicks. Sal Sincere, Freddie Joe Floyd, the Goon, and now
hey, the Goon got over. Bill Irwin could work. I mean, the Goon got over. Bill and his brother Scotter, when he passed away years before, man, Bill could freaking work. Bill got over, I think, more than anybody. No offense to these other guys, but I thought Bill got over terrifically. Get out there and he dropped the gloves and he'd go fight. It was so fun watching Bill. Bill could do anything. One of the nicest guys in the world, but he's the most negative sumbitch on the planet. You ask him, Bill, how's the house? And he sold out. He goes, big money, big money. It's like, dude, we're sold out. You're gonna actually make a lot of money. Yeah. Big money, big money. Bill was the best.
When your eyes sort of lit up when I mentioned the TL Hopper gimmick. I know we've all heard the sort of the toilet humor thing, but do you know? I mean, for real, do you have any insight on Vince's feelings on the TL Hopper gimmick? Because people have been fascinated with this, and I don't know that you've even seen that. People started to call this era the era of occupational gimmicks. So you had a dentist and you had a plumber, you had a garbage man, but the TL Hopper gimmick, can you give us any insight as to why Vince would see, I see TL Hopper? That just sounds so make-believe to me.
We had a makeup. I'm not going to give away the name of the makeup girl or the name of the celebrity. You can figure all this out. She was the only makeup girl in the 90s and a wonderful lady, terrific. She's still a good friend. And they had the most downloaded internet star at the time, not Sonny, but a person that came in from the outside. And she came to me and she was just a freaking diva. I mean, everybody hated that girl. And she's a beautiful girl, obviously, but it was when we first got downloads off the internet, and she came to me, she goes, hey, I got to tell you something. I got to tell you something. I said, what is it? She goes, I just took a dump in her dressing room and didn't flush it.
Oh my God.
I said, that's the greatest thing. I said, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. I said, did you really? And so it's like, so guys used to think that was funny. Guys, bathroom humor among old wrestlers was something that, and again, fans that listen to this go, you guys are sick. That's disgusting. There's nothing funny about it. I laughed to this day about all the bathroom humor. Vince came out of the bathroom one time and he had a celebrity that was germophobic, and Vince acted like he was washing his hands, and the guy didn't shake hands. And Vince comes out and sticks his hand out there wet, making the guy shake hands, just to mess with him. I mean, guys did that. TL Hopper was right up everybody's alley because that's what we did. We were childish and very very immature.
How is Howie Mandel doing these days?
That's it. I knew you'd get it. That's great. That's great. Yeah, well, Vince came out and he had like he just used the bathroom. Howie would like bump fists and everything.
Yeah.
And Vince comes out like he just pulling up his pants. He did all this on purpose. I don't know. Now you got to think about this. You don't know when Howie's going to come into the room, so you got to plan this rib out, and you got to be ready to do this. Yes. So there's like a lot of planning goes into this. Vince comes out of the bathroom. He's like, whoa, get away with that. Ha ha. Comes out, his hands wet, and goes shakes Howie's hand.
It's the best. It's got to be hard, trying to figure out how to fit in the wrestling space as an outsider when you don't know that they're ribbing you, but they put you in these uncomfortable positions. Hey, speaking of hard, how about Blue Chew? All right, y'all, we got to brag on our sponsor, Blue Chew. They have turned it up a notch. We've all heard that before. You got to hit fifth gear. You got to kick it into overdrive. Well, Blue Chew's done it with Blue Chew Max, and it combines the active ingredients from Viagra and Cialis into one chewable. This is a tag team that acts fast and lasts. Think of them as like your tag team specialists. They're the real Midnight Express of the bedroom. Guys, be ready whenever she needs it and get your first month of Blue Chew free. Great sex truly is just a few clicks away. All you do is sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA. They're prepared and shipped directly to your door, and the best part is it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. So make your life easier by getting harder and discover your options at BlueChew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try your first month of Blue Chew free when you use the promo code WRESTLE. Just pay $5 shipping. That's promo code WRESTLE. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast.
You know, T.L. Hopper could work. He was a good worker.
Yeah.
He was getting over. Him and Bill Irwin, I mean, they were getting that over. They just got stuck in, not in bad gimmicks. Those gimmicks weren't great, obviously, but they made the most of them. But they were gimmicks that obviously had a ceiling of where you could be on the card. Those weren't going to be, because of the gimmick, not because of the work. These guys were not going to be main event guys with those gimmicks, which was kind of a shame because both those guys were really good workers.
I do want to spend a minute talking about Ricky and Robert. This is going to be really the first time that the Rock and Roll Express have been on the national stage in a few years at this point. Of course, a decade prior, they were one of the biggest, most successful tag teams that Jim Crockett Promotions ever had. I mean, they were actually selling more tickets in certain markets than Flair and Dusty on top. That's 86. This is late 97, early 98. And for whatever reason, the presentation of the Rock and Roll Express was not resonating with the audience. Did they just see this as an 80s presentation? And how much of that was really contingent just on the look? Like, if Ricky and Robert had changed their gear or their hairstyles, or was there a way to update for the Attitude Era of the Rock and Roll Express? Or is that sort of the charm of the Rock and Roll Express? You want it to look like it always has. Where do you land on that?
I don't know, and we won't know because we had what we had. And, people talk about you have to change your character ever so often, and you do. But the Hardys haven't.
Right.
And the Hardys 30 years later are as over as they were almost 30 years ago. I mean, the run the Hardys are on right now is historic. There's no other way to put it. It's incredible. I see their lines at the signings. They're outdrawing everybody. And I see their reaction when they come out in a live crowd. It's freaking amazing. I mean, those guys, it is unbelievable what the Hardys have done. So I don't want to hear this shit about. I read all the newsletters that you sent to me in the research about. Ricky was 41 years old. Really, man, fuck you. These guys could work. They were two of the greatest workers of all time. People always ask me, what team would you like to have faced in history? Me and Ron, I'd love to have had a year run with Ricky and Robert. Those guys were that good. I worked with Ricky and Robert later. But in Texas under Crockett, but I'd love to have worked with take those guys from the 80s. They could have still got over. You can't. It's impossible to get over that much as Ricky and Robert did in the Carolinas and not be able to get over somewhere else. So I think it was the presentation. I think they just got stuck in a bad spot with the NWA and weren't planning on getting pushed.
It's interesting, too, because the line that you're talking about was from The Observer. This came out on the issue dated January 19th, 1998. Here's what Dave wrote. If they are the champs, they should have belts, and it would make them 6-time champions. But then again, the NWA title only dates back to 1948 and not 1905. And the match everyone talks about is the first world title match in 1905 was really in 1908 anyway. The crowd was dead. Morton, who was 41, and Gibson, 40, looked positively ancient. And it was like watching a Saturday Night Live spoof of two old men trying to be the Rock and Roll Express. So he just totally craps on them based on their age. And I think that's interesting because this year WrestleMania is going to be headlined by a 46-year-old CM Punk and a 48-year-old John Cena.
Yep.
I guess John will turn 48 2 days after the show, but still, it is interesting to see the way age is written about and discussed in professional wrestling Because a lot of people, I mean, just a few years prior to this, respectfully, we had the Billionaire Ted skits, and people were mocking the age of Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage like they were ancient. But as time has gone on, we're continually seeing wrestlers in high profile positions at later stages of their life, older and older. Has the business changed, or has taste changed? Why do you think that is? Why is it more acceptable now to have quote unquote older talent in a top spot?
I don't know. You look at guys who drew money, years before, even before the TV era. Strangler Lewis drew money, late 40s. Jim Londos was in his 50s and was still drawing really big money. Lou Thez was still drawing money, late in life. But then around the 80s, it just became, I don't know. It became, when you got in your 40s, you became too old. And I'm not sure what happened, but that certainly was the perception. And so when you look at Ricky and Robert, I don't blame Dave Meltzer for writing that, because that was the perception at the time. I don't think it was real. I think they could have got over anywhere. I know Ricky and Robert, I think they could have got over. And by the way, I want to pick at Dave here. He knows history better than I do. But Tom Jenkins and George Hackenschmidt was 1905. That was the first big match. Hackenschmidt and Gotch was 1908. So there was a world championship in 1905. I don't know if he was talking about Gotch and Hackenschmidt. Now, 1948, I get that, but nobody cares. History is what you put it on television, whether it's legit or not. You want to say the NWA has been around, since early 1900s, which we all know it wasn't. But to me, that's not a hill to fight on. But I do want to pick at the 1905, the Jenkins versus Hackenschmidt. I'd like to see from some wrestling historians out there if that's considered one of the first big world championships. But I think the perception of age just changed in the 80s and early 90s, that when you're 40-something years old, you're just too old. And now people look at the Golden Girls. Those women were like 50 years old. Now you look at 50 years old and you see, Trish Stratus, I think, just turned 50. She looks as good as she did when she was 23. It's just amazing. People age. I think people age differently now, or I guess that's what it is.
How much do you think, boy, I'm going to sidebar here, but as somebody who spent their fair amount of time in the gym and around other athletes, I'm sure you're at least familiar with the phenomenon known as HGH. Yeah. And HGH and peptides and things like that, that's used in a lot of women's, beauty stuff, and has been for a long time. But I also know that a lot of professional athletes have used it to sort of slow down the hands of time. Do you think HGH and other advances we've seen in performance enhancing drugs, and I'm not talking about steroids specifically, but I'm just saying everything else in the genre, has that really changed the way we perceive age in entertainment?
I think it has to. Yeah. I think nutrition overall has improved significantly. And I think you add to that, the ancillary stuff like HGH and your peptides and your stem cells and things like that. But I think nutrition has just changed. I think people have gotten so much better about when we started back in, like 1980s, when I first played my pro sport in 1989. Nobody knew anything about cardio. I mean, all you did was lift, and Arnold and those guys didn't do cardio. They just lifted all the time. And if they want to lose weight, they got their diet a little bit better. Now people are doing cardio. They're watching their diet. They understand how many grams of protein to take. It's become a real science. As late as the mid-90s, it was not a science. And that was just 30 years ago. People didn't know how to eat like you needed to. Ronnie Coleman, who was a cop up in Dallas, who did a lot in wrestling, by the way, in sportatorium. Not a lot, but he did some. I got to meet Ronnie when came up as you got to see Ronnie Coleman in a policeman outfit. It's like, you got to be kidding me. You don't need a gun, pal. Just get out and go, people will run from you. But Ronnie Coleman talks about how he could eat more than anybody else. And that was the biggest difference between him and everybody else. That came along a lot later. That came along after Haney. That came along after Platts. That came along after Arnold. I mean, that was completely different. That changed everything. Nutrition changed everything. I'll tell you about HGH. I was going to have shoulder surgery years ago. I've had consistent problems with my shoulder. I had it operated on since and had it almost completely rebuilt. But a doctor told me, said, take some HGH. And this was a surgeon. And I went and got some HGH, and fixed my shoulder for probably 15 years. Made me feel so much better. I just took one dose. I didn't take it for bodybuilding reasons. I took it for my shoulder to regenerate my shoulder, and it worked. Now people can say it doesn't work like that. I can tell you what it worked for me. It got me out of having shoulder surgery and completely changed my health. I took it one time for about 5 or 6 months. Everything got better. I had stem cells about 6 months ago. Same thing. I've had torn bicep up here. I've had torn bicep down here, 2 torn biceps on the same arm, shoulder rebuilt, and I couldn't do a curl. Everything changed after those stem cells. I feel, it's like I was 10 years ago, not 20 years ago. That was a different me, but it's really changed. And so I think a lot of that's come about, the medical, the pharmacology of so much of this has changed completely. And I'm not talking about the steroids, as you say. You're talking about stuff that rejuvenates the body, and people can live longer and be healthier and be younger for a lot longer.
Yeah. And also too, let's be honest, TRT has become a pretty common thing. Like you and I both know, folks in their 60s and 70s who are regular TRT users. And as a result of that, they're on television and looking like they used to look, years ago. And they're able to do that because as your body stops making testosterone, well, you get a little supplement. I view that differently than a guy getting Dianabol or something like that. That's a totally different thing. We're supplementing what our body used to make on its own. We're just getting us feeling like we used to. When do you remember? Because I know this was a hot button with the UFC for years and years. You would have guys, and we won't name any names, but it used to be spoken about in almost a shameful thing, like, oh, all of these wrestlers who were, trying to get some sort of a competitive edge in the UFC, they've become so reliant on TRT that now, after years of doing this testosterone replacement therapy, that's what it stands for. I guess I should have said that. Maybe their body stops producing it the way it used to completely, and so now they really do become reliant on it. But I know it was spoken about in the UFC conversation as a way to get a competitive edge, or maybe it was cheating, or it was a gray area. Wrestling doesn't have to deal with any of that. Do you remember when TRT sort of became commonplace in wrestling? Because it's not a competitive sport in the way that UFC is.
Yeah, and I agree with that analogy. About 10 years ago, I believe is when it was, 15 years ago, people started taking TRT and taking, I remember doctors, at that point started pushing it, for older people.
Yes.
And they literally would just say, you want to take some TRT, you want to take some testosterone, it'll make you feel better. Now, as far as a sport like UFC, I completely agree with you. Ban every bit of it. I think you need to ban every bit of it. I think you need to ban every bit of it in powerlifting. I think you need to ban all the shirts and all the bullshit pellet paraphernalia that guys use in powerlifting. A guy can't bench press 1,300 pounds. Ban the shirts, make them lift raw, but also ban all of the pharmaceutical stuff. But as far as wrestling, we're not a competition. So older guys that are taking it, good for them. And the thing about it is, with WWE, I know this because I've had to go through all of the testing, all the different stuff that you have. If you have something like that, WWE knows about it, and they know where it's coming from. I mean, comparing like the old wrestling that I was in when I first started to now, it's not even the same business. WWE will have you go to an endocrinologist to get any of this stuff. You have to be checked out. Everything has to be checked with WWE. Any prescription that might be something that would enhance you physically is checked by WWE, which is wonderful. But I have no issue with that. Guys want to take this and it's done by a doctor. Don't get it from your local jacked up guy at the gym. But if it's done by a doctor, I think it's fantastic. And that is changing how people are getting into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and later.
I am curious from a WWE standpoint, because you were there sort of through all the different iterations of testing and all that. My perception or my belief on steroid use in wrestling for years has been, who cares? Like, I take a look at a movie like The Expendables, and we see guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger looking unreal. I mean, he looks like a real life action figure in his late 60s. And you're like, come on now. And I don't care. It's entertainment. So I know there's been criticism of big time WWE wrestlers who, have a phenomenal look, but there's always but it's steroids. But if it's not a combat sport and it's not a true blue competition and it is entertainment, I just don't see why anybody gives a shit. Is that the way most wrestlers perceive it? Or was once upon a time it like, oh, that guy's got to be on the gas and spoken about as if he had some sort of competitive edge or he was cheating or he was taking a shortcut? Like it's entertainment. It's Hollywood. Like this is part of the gig. And as long as it's not done through a street pharmacist, as you said, and you're getting it legitimately, what are we talking about? Is that the way wrestlers perceived it or no?
Yeah, that is the way wrestlers perceived it. But I will tell you this, that I was there, during steroid testing, and when they weren't steroid testing, when they were drug testing, when they weren't drug testing, I was there during all the different phases. When they started steroid testing, guys were kind of relieved because now you don't have to compete with, the guy who's going to just go over there and take, I don't even know if Anadrol is around anymore, but Anadrol was at one time the most androgenic thing you could take, and guys would get huge on it. And you realize I don't have to take all that crap to compete. Now the catch-22 is you don't look as good.
Right.
So like when WCW wasn't testing and our guys were, our guys don't look as good, and that's a real problem when you got a television product, and that's, we suspended testing for financial reasons during that time. Yeah, financial reasons. They wanted our guys to get jacked so we'd make more money. But I think it's good for health. If you're testing the testosterone, who cares? You're not going to get huge off that stuff. It just makes you feel better. If you're underneath a doctor's care, you're not going to take too much of it. Who cares? If it's done with the doctor. The steroids, I think it's good that they don't have a health risk with it. Now, the thing that came was people thought guys were dying from steroids. People aren't dying. I'm telling you, I've looked at this a million times. I got a lot of friends who died. Guys died from pills. They didn't die from cocaine. They didn't die from steroids. They certainly didn't die from weed. They died from pills. And so that's the one thing that you've got to stay very strict on, because those are so freaking addictive. And you have guys that are in pain all the time. If you have access to it, that's where guys get them and die. It's not the cocaine, it's not the steroids, but it's good to have tests, in my opinion, because you don't have to compete with that. The problem comes when you got a competitor that doesn't compete and that doesn't test. And now all of a sudden your guys are 20 pounds lighter and there's an issue with perception.
Well, I tell you, we're all looking to feel our best. And one of the most challenging things is feeling like you barely slept when you wake up. We've all done that before. Like we were in the bed all night, but we're still tired. And if you feel that way, you're not alone. That's why I recommend Recovery PM. Our modern lifestyles are affecting our sleep, screen time, social media, just the chemicals in our food. That all just names a few. But the doctors and health experts agree that most people would see major improvements in their overall health and performance simply with improved sleep. You see, poor sleep is stealing your energy, your mood, and even your testosterone. But there is a fix: Recovery PM. Now, unlike sleep cheap aids that just pump you full of melatonin, Recovery PM is a clinically formulated blend of 9 different natural sleep aids and tranquilizers. That includes magnesium, 5-HTP, and GABA, all to help you relax, fall asleep faster, and wake up refreshed. There's no grogginess, there's no sluggish mornings, just deep quality sleep that fuels better recovery, mental alertness, fat loss, and even boosts your testosterone in men. So don't let bad sleep hold you back. Try Recovery PM for 30 days and feel the difference. Over 85% of our customers come back for more because it really works. Get yours now at recoverypm.com and start waking up ready to attack the day. By the way, recoverypm.com is brought to you by WWE SmackDown General Manager and friend of the show, Nick Aldis, who has to be at his best 24/7, so you can trust the quality. Go right now to recoverypm.com and use the code WRESTLE for 10% off Recovery PM, because your best life starts with better sleep. That's recoverypm.com and use the promo code WRESTLE and you'll get 10% off. Hey, so we're spending.
Hey, Conrad, let me mention one other thing. I was sitting there today, and I love Finn Balor. I think he's a great wrestler, and I think he's a terrific. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
But I've seen Finn every time I've gone in the TV. He brings his own food with him, and he measures it down to the freaking gram. Now, there's a reason he looks like he does, and I look like I do, But he works incredibly hard at it. We didn't have anybody that knew that much back in the early 90s to do that. I mean, we didn't have people that knew enough. We had people that were good with nutrition, knew a little bit about protein, knew a little bit about carbs, didn't know anything about cardio. I mean, it is a different game today. And so the health of these guys, when they want to, the resources are just absolutely incredible out there for being able to change your body. And I think that may have a lot to do also with the longevity of some of these wrestlers.
Let's spend a little bit of time talking about Dan Severn. It's come out here in early 98 that he does sign a WWF contract, and he is going to be coming in. Jim Ross has pretty routinely referred to him as the NWA champion on the hotline. And the guess and speculation is going to be that he's going to become a part of the World Wrestling Federation and the NWA angle. Chat me up about Dan Severn, a guy you and I haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but I know you have to hold him in high regard just because of all the things he did in legitimate fighting, right?
Yeah, one of the greatest combat athletes of all time. Dan is absolutely incredible, and he's very, very strategic. We had him on our show, and he was telling us about one of his grandkids, and he was throwing the ball to him. And this is typical Dan. He's, such a brainiac. He said, I'd throw the ball to my grandson. He's like 5 or 6, whatever it was. He goes, but I'd make him catch it and bring it in the middle. Just to train him, the eye contact, doing the right thing. That's Dan in a nutshell. Dan is a very cerebral guy. He had a schedule nobody will ever match. He would go from working to shooting one night to the next. He was working every weekend back then. So if he wasn't working with WWE, he was working for an independent. If he wasn't working for an independent, he would go do a freaking shoot fight somewhere. He told me he was never in a training camp because he fought all the time. He was either in working matches every weekend or he was fighting. It was an unbelievable schedule that Severn had. Severn, people that don't know Dan and people that don't know his history, man, you need to look back at Severn and see what all he did and his record and how many fights he had and the fact that he never had a training camp for those fights. I think he told me he had 2 training camps total. But after he fought the UFC that he won, he never had another one because he's fighting every weekend.
It's so fascinating, look at Dan Severn. I do want to ask you about the breakup, though. We've mentioned that we knew it was coming, but it finally happens. Raw on January 19th in Fresno, California. So this is going to be, really the night after the Royal Rumble, the famous Mike Tyson Raw. Well, on the undercard, we would see Jeff Jarrett defeat you as Blackjack Bradshaw in 3 minutes and 41 seconds. The Rock and Roll Express are wearing the NWA tag team titles at ringside, and they're interfering freely. And then after the match, there's the big break. It looks like Bradshaw's going to turn on you, Barry Windham's going to turn on you, Blackjack Windham at the time, and he's going to become the newest member of the NWA. He turns on you. So listen, I know it's sort of thrown together. It's not really a really long story, but we have to have a storyline reason to sort of make the distinction. I still take a look at these still photos and just love the way you guys look as a tag team. And man, I wish that the new Blackjacks had a longer run. What did you think about the breakup angle and the way it was perceived? And I guess this is your first time on TV with your new big contract, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And I had so much fun working with those guys. I had fun working with Jeff. Jeff was a blast to work with. Jeff is so good in the ring. I mean, some of these guys, you got to be in the ring with some of these guys that are pros like Jeff to realize how good they are. Like Eddie Guerrero. You can't describe it. And so it's fun being out there. And then you add in the Rock and Roll Boys and Barry Windham. I mean, and Cornette. I mean, this is heaven for me. I enjoyed every second of this. And I enjoyed that I was going to get to work singles matches with Barry and something that had a little steam behind it. Not much, but had a little steam behind it because to me, it was a huge honor.
I do want to ask you, the next week, it's actually taped the next day in Davis, California. But on that show, that's where we would see Jeff Jarrett tag with Barry Windham to wrestle the Legion of Doom. You're going to come in and attack Barry Windham for the DQ. I guess LOD's pissed off because you've cost them the match. But as a guy who was still relatively young in your career, I mean, I know you've been at it for a few years at this point, but just knowing the affection and affinity you had for the guys maybe just slightly a generation ahead of you, to be in the ring with the son of Jerry Jarrett, legendary promoter Jeff Jarrett, and Barry Windham, the former NWA world champion, and not that many years prior to this, the greatest tag team attraction in the entire industry in the Legion of Doom. And now here you are. And oh, by the way, Jim Cornette's on the outside. This has to be like, and I know it's not slotted at the main event and all that, but just as a performer doing bucket list stuff about their own fandom, this has to be right up your alley, right?
Oh my God. I was in college and I went up to Reunion Arena and I watched Bill Watts wrestle. And somebody said something about why you got a baseball bat if you're so tough. He goes, I don't need a bat. I got something better than that. And out came the Road Warriors, and that music started playing. And man, that place to this day, that's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I can see it. I can feel it right now. How cool that was when those Road Warriors came out with those spiky shoulder pads, and they came out. That place went absolutely ballistic. And I remember before that match thinking about that Reunion Arena experience and thinking, I'm about to be in the ring with those same guys. This is cool. This is great. And then you add in guys who I love. You know, Jim Cornette, to me, we haven't talked that much about Jim. He's brilliant. I'm brilliant. And I don't use that word lightly. A brilliant guy. And I love Jim. I've always had fun visiting with Jim. I think he's a great guy. And always an acquired taste. I don't care. He's the taste I like. And then the Rock and Roll Boys. You know, Ricky told me one time, he said, the difference between me and you. And I said, what's that? He goes, you got a contract. And I thought, yeah, you're right. You know, they were huge in the Carolinas. You know, if they'd been huge in WWE, you know, those guys, you wouldn't even see them now because they'd be flying around their private planes and they'd have made so much money, you know, and they made great money for the territories. They made great money for where they were. But, you know, they weren't lucky to be in a place where when Hogan was hot or when Steve was hot or when Rock was hot, you know, they just unlucky timing. But to be out there with them and Windham, who I grew up, you know, Gary Hart did me the biggest favor in the world. I was worried he may have slighted me because I'm from Sweetwater, Texas, and Mulligan claimed he was from there. He wasn't, but he claimed he was. So Gary Hart claimed I was Barry Windham's cousin. And so I always wrestled as Barry Windham's cousin, which I always thought about. I'm not Barry Windham's cousin. Don't say that. I want to run into Barry Windham one day. But everybody would repeat it for a while. Then I run into Barry. Of course, he had no idea. And he wouldn't have cared, I don't think, if he did. But those guys were guys I idolized. And to be out there with them, I didn't care what I was doing. It was fun.
It is interesting to think about what if, especially on guys like the Rock and Roll Express, because, you know, you just think with the integration that Vince was doing in the 80s with MTV, you know, rock and wrestling.
Oh, can you imagine those guys with Cyndi Lauper?
Imagine the cartoon Hulk Hogan with Ricky and Robert. I mean, Hulk Hogan's rock and wrestling, like that just fits. Of course, meanwhile, they're selling out every arena they go to for Jim Crockett Promotions, but they don't have the licensing machine, the promotional machine that is the WWF. And I'm sure Ricky has enjoyed much greater success in the last 10 years or so. He's certainly enjoyed a great resurgence with his son Kerry coming on and sort of the last hurrah with the Rock and Roll Express. But I had a conversation with him like 12 or 13 years ago, and he was telling me just the economics of his run with JCP. He did not make the money he should have with Jim Crockett Promotions. And it is interesting to think, like we've all heard the famous stories of how much money the Iron Sheik made from that first LJN action figure. And if they would have had that opportunity to have the merchandise and the licensing behind the Rock and Roll Express, that whole 85, 86, 87 run, if they had that with Vince, man, their lives, their family trees look a little different.
Unbelievable the amount of money that they would have made if they'd just been in a different place.
Yes.
It's, you know, as Ricky says, you had a contract. Well, you had when Ricky came in. I've always loved Rick. Ricky's the funniest guy. Him and Robert, they tell the worst jokes ever. I've heard them all a million times, and I still laugh at them because it's like
you understand.
Oh my God, it's like It's like Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx wasn't funny. He just told the best jokes. He was funny. You know, like Dutch Mantel. Dutch Mantel is not that funny, but the way he tells it, Dutch is the most entertaining guy I've ever been around. And Ricky and Robert are the same thing. They just tell these jokes, and you know the punchline because you heard it the day before from them. But you still laugh at it. But where Ricky was there in the dressing room, we found out that Vader wore lifts in his tennis shoes. You know, Vader wasn't that tall. You know, he was a big guy. He was a first-round draft pick for the Rams, played in the Super Bowl. Vader was legit, but he didn't like the fact that he wasn't like 6'5". So he wore lifts in his tennis shoes when he walked around the airport. And so me and Windham, a lot of times we would get one lift out of one of his shoes, so he had to walk wobbly, and we'd stick it in Ricky Morton's bag. And Ricky told us one day, he goes, dude, that big son of a bitch is going to kill me. You got to quit sticking that shit in my bag.
I love hearing those Ricky Morton jokes. One of my favorite ones, and there's a few that I probably can't tell in the air, but one of my favorite ones.
A few?
He's talking about the 80s, and you know the difference between me and Robert back then, Connie? What's that, sir? Well, I'd walk over and put it in. Robert would put it in and walk over.
This is oh my God. And the one you tell, he goes, yeah, I'm sitting there. I got this beautiful woman in the hotel room. And I tell Robert, and I said, I reached down, I grabbed the biggest pecker I've ever had in my life. I'm ready to go. He goes, Robert, I'm going to go in there and we're going to have sex. And he goes, Robert will go, I got to go with you. And he goes, why? He goes, because you got my dick. That's horrible. That's not funny.
He told me once, you know, I had a great run, and I'd been out on the road about 3 months, and finally coming home, and thought I wanted to show up at home with my wife, and brought her a big bouquet of flowers, and I brought it to her and sat it down and gave her a kiss on the cheek, and she said, "Oh, I guess you expect me to spread my legs now?" And I said, "Well, honey, I thought we might put them in a vase." I don't know. I mean, we've all heard the joke, but it's still, when Ricky delivers it, it's
this is the funniest thing. It is the best. And Robert just stands there like Ed McMahon.
Oh, my favorite is when he told this joke next to Robert. He says, Conrad, when we were on our way to the building, they was walking their dog, and that dog was out by the elephant door in the back, and he's leaned over licking himself, you know, like dogs do. And Robert looked at me and said, "Man, I wish I could do that." And I just looked at him and I said, "Robert, you better not. That dog will bite the shit out of you." And I don't know why, but it still fucking makes me laugh even thinking about it. Shout out to Ricky and Robert. And if you see Ricky, you understand, on these shows with his son, Kerry James, I recommend you go see him. You understand?
Kerry's I love his boy. What a good young man. But I love Ricky. Oh my God. What we are so lucky to have Ricky in the world. And I'm lucky to have Ricky in my life. I think the world of Ricky. But those jokes are the freaking worst. And Robert is like Ed McMahon. He just sits there and laughs at them. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't really add much to the conversation. Now, he will throw in like a punchline or something because he's heard the same joke millions of times. But Robert is just kind of like fodder there. You know, it's just like Ricky tells it. And Robert loves to be the setup man. He just sets him up and that's it.
It's fantastic. If you get a chance to see those guys at an appearance or a meet and greet or a WrestleCon or a StarCast or whatever, go see them.
Robert brought me down to somewhere in Alabama one time or something. He goes, "Hey, would you come down to the shop I'm working with or something?" He had like a part ownership in there or something. I said, "Sure, yeah." So he picked me up, nice as he could be, and I'd do it again in a million every time for Robert. And I got down there, and one of the fans says, "I don't have change." I said, "For what?" He was charging for my autographs and didn't tell me. So he's like having people line up and he's getting all the money.
I love that. That's tremendous.
I do too. I thought it was great.
We got to mention that when Dan Severn comes in, of course, we know he's not going to be positioned the way maybe he could have been. Is there, and listen, I understand the challenges because he was very legitimate and he was a throwback and he was old school. And now we're throwing him right in the middle of where Dustin is doing some very crazy experimental stuff with the Goldust character. And we've got to sort of reconcile that with now just a down and dirty old school professional wrestler. Was there with the benefit of hindsight, was there a different way to present Dan Severn and him enjoy more success in the WWE than what they did?
Yeah, I would have never brought him in as the NWA champion ever, because that is a ceiling that you put on him because of Vince. There's no way that the animosity, when Vince, it's different now. When you bring a guy in that might be a TNA champion, or bring a guy in that might have a championship from AAA or New Japan or NOAH, you name it, it's different now because there's not real competition. Back then there was, and they were in a zero-sum game. Vince McMahon Sr. dropped out of the NWA to create a new championship. Vince Jr. and Sr. got back in, and they dropped out again. I mean, it was legitimate competition, and Vince still had that. There's no way he's going to put over that title over his main guys, unless Severn becomes one of his guys. But at that point, you take the title away from him, just like he did with Jeff Jarrett. You take the title away from him, put the Intercontinental Championship on it. Now you can give him a push. You're not going to give him a push with the NWA. So I think the NWA limited him. It was a ceiling that you put on him that was not very fair for a guy that is one of the greatest combat athletes of all time.
Let's talk a little bit about the Observer. And I know how you feel about Dave, and I know how Bruce feels about
No, wait a minute. I don't know. I don't know if I'll Bruce. I think Bruce hates Dave, doesn't he? Yeah, I don't know if I do.
I thought he was working at first, but now just even in more modern times. Earlier this week,
what do you think about him?
I love Dave Meltzer. I think he comes from a place of Dave Meltzer. I know I get a lot of criticism for this, but I don't believe for a second that Dave Meltzer has ever intentionally lied. But I also think if Dave is,
I can see that
criticism like everyone else, I do believe that Dave makes mistakes that aren't necessarily called out, and he believes that what he wrote was true. So he just marches on through life with slightly incorrect information. And here's an example of that from 1998. It's written about here. The February 2nd Raw from Indianapolis was built around an angle which started off as an angle of the year, but ended up as a goofy Three Stooges skit. Blackjack Bradshaw, whose real name isn't John Hawk or Justin Bradshaw, but actually John Hayfield. And then later he says, hard to believe since Windham looks so old and people think of Bradshaw as a young rising star, but actually Windham and Bradshaw are the same age, 37. To be clear, you had just turned 31, and we know that your name is not Hayfield, it's Layfield. In the next week or a couple of weeks later, Meltzer would correct it. He did misspell it when he corrected it, but he said Layfield, L-E-Y. It's L-A-Y, but whatever, he corrected it. But this is one of the reasons, an example, I think, that a lot of people who are critical of Dave, guys like Bruce Prichard, guys like Eric Bischoff, they would gravitate to this and say, he's telling the paying audience, the diehard wrestling consumer, Bradshaw's name is wrong that he's reporting, and his age is wrong. So you're making him seem older than he really is. I know you don't give a shit. I get that about your personality, but this is the type of thing that guys like Eric or Bruce would say. They think they know everything, but they don't know how old people are or what their names are. It's all bullshit. I don't think that's fair, because in 1997, and I know we're February of 98, so we'll call it 98. It's not like, everybody could just Google it and here's all the information about this person. That wasn't really out there. Did you pay any attention to stuff like this? Did stuff like that bother you at all when the newsletters would report that you were actually older than you were? Did you felt like that hurt your negotiating or leverage, or did it affect your business at all? Did you pay any attention to it whatsoever?
I saw that for the first time last night when I read it. No, of course not. I didn't read the newsletters. Back then, when I first started, you get fired if you had a newsletter, the territories I worked. And so nobody read them that I knew of around me. And I just never read them. They're always negative. And, I picked at Dave throughout the years, always, took shots at him because I was always a heel on television. So I was always trying to get him to, say some negative stuff. I thought it helped me. And so I can see why his negativity toward me. But there's a lot of stuff. I mean, WWE listed me as 6'5" for my entire career almost. I've always been 6'6". Everybody else, they exaggerated the other way. They lowered mine. I never cared. If I'm 6'5" or 6'7", does it really matter? I mean, that stuff never mattered to me. Kurt Angle wrote my name down as John Layfield in one of his books or something. What it was, just a whatever. And so when I saw him, I said, Kurt, I thought it was a rib. And I said, what's up with mispronouncing my name? He goes, what is your name? He had no idea. He had written it down, and I guess the editor or something had put it in there. So I listed him as Burt Ankle in my book when I wrote it instead of Kurt Angle, and he didn't care either. So anyway, so the gold medalist got my name wrong, and I don't care. I mean, that stuff to me, that's an honest mistake by Meltzer. He didn't, he wouldn't have done that on purpose. It just,
There you go. That's my thing. Is it's like, where's the intent? Is the intent to intentionally lie and defraud and mislead? And the answer is no. So, like, why are we villainizing the guy? He's sharing his opinion on wrestling, and people are like, your opinion's wrong. How can his opinion be wrong? He's not stating something as a fact. He's just saying, I fucking really liked it.
Well, hey, by the way, we had Keith Greenberg on our show this past week. It's going to air next Thursday.
Shout out to him.
Fantastic, talking about WrestleMania and the territories and all that stuff. Bruiser Brody was a big fan of David Meltzer. I wouldn't have believed that. I thought Bruiser would be a kayfabe guy, but Bruiser, because of his sports writing background, is all I can think of. Thought that Meltzer was the only like say legit sports writer, and he thought you needed more coverage like that in wrestling. So it was shocking to me to hear that Brody, no feelings one way or the other, but it was shocking that Brody was a big fan of Dave Meltzer.
I mean, Brody's real life, being a journalist before he got into the wrestling business. I mean, I think he held it in high regard. I want to give a shout out to Keith Elliott Greenberg, friend of the show. He's got a brand new book called Bigger, Better, Badder. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it on Ad-Free Shows.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And it really talks about a deep dive on how WrestleMania 3 changed and reshaped wrestling as entertainment and just the industry as a whole. Like, what a watershed moment WrestleMania 3 is. And it's even the cover of the book is a great cartoon drawing of Hulk Hogan and Andre. Look for it anywhere you enjoy books. I've got my hard copy. I still like physical media. Bigger, Better, Badder is where you need to look for. Hey, let's talk about No Way Out of Texas. This is February of 98. Of course, this is the now infamous multi-man tag team main event that Shawn Michaels was unable to compete in. So we announced it as a mystery tag team partner. And the mystery is Savio Vega. Maybe not the biggest surprise we were hoping for, but still a damn nasty-ass main event. Trash can shots, barbed wire, all kinds of silliness. But before we get there, the fourth match on the show is you and Jeff Jarrett for the NWA North American title. Dave would call you the wrestler formerly known with a first name because they're just calling you Bradshaw here. What did you think about that transition? You were Justin Hawk Bradshaw, and then you were Blackjack Bradshaw, and now you're just Bradshaw. Did you like that presentation here in early 98?
Yeah, I did. And I tell you how the name Justin Hawk Bradshaw came about, because when you came in the WWE, heels didn't stay that long. And I figured I would stay 2 to 3 years and I'd finish in Japan. That was my whole career. That was my career path that I thought I would go. So when I came in, I wanted a name that I could take. And I'd use the name John Hawk. Killer Tim Brooks gave me that name on the fly. It was off of a guy that was last wrestler named Hawk. He thought I looked like his cousin. I never saw that other wrestler again. I can't remember the guy's first name. Anyway, that's how I got the name John Hawk, and I used that for years from Killer Tim Brooks. So when I came into WWE, Vince wanted to call me Justin Bradshaw. And again, when I came into WWE, Jerry Briscoe was the only one that watched my tryout match. It was during a snowstorm and a state of emergency in the state of Pennsylvania. There was 200-something people in the entire arena. Vince was in makeup. He never saw me wrestle. He just took the word of Jerry Briscoe, hey, we got to sign this guy, otherwise he's going to WCW. Vince said sign him. They flew me up to Connecticut. I meet with Vince for the first time, and he's going to give me the name Justin Bradshaw. Well, I figured, man, I can't take that name somewhere else, because, the reason you change names so you can't build it somewhere and take it somewhere else. I want to go to Japan when my contract is up in 2 years. And it wasn't the guaranteed contract. It was the old booking contract. So with no money attached to it. So I figured at the end of 2 years, I want to take my name and go somewhere else. That was still my plan when I went to Japan with Windham. The plan was just right on track with what I thought I was going to do. Well, so when I'm sitting there with Vince, I thought, man, I don't want the name Bradshaw. I want to use something like Hawk so I can build my name and take it to Japan. So I said, Vince, how about Justin Hawk? I kind of like the name Hawk. And I'm trying to get the name close enough where I can, John Hawk, Justin Hawk, I can take that name to Japan and just be called Hawk. So that was my idea. And Vince cared so little that he said, all right, how about Justin Hawk Bradshaw? And that was it. I'm like, oh, shit. Now I got 3 names. So that's how the name came about, was because I was trying to sneak in the name Hawk into my names, because I figured I'd only be there a couple of years and go somewhere else and take the name. So I'm Justin Hawk Bradshaw, which is a nightmare to sign for autographs. You know, it takes forever. JBL is the best. But I hated having 3 names. So when Vince just dropped it to 1 name, which Vince did a lot with people, Vince thought that was kind of cool when a person just had 1 name. You saw that all throughout Vince's run. He would make a person 1 name, and he said, we're just going to call you Bradshaw. Perfect. Now, the Sheik still thought my name was Bradshaw, 2 names, but that was
right.
The Sheik. That was the Sheik.
Hey, let's spend just a minute here and talk about what else changes, because not only are you just using 1 name as Bradshaw, but you're also coming down to the ring with a bull rope, and the ultra stiff offense is the way that Dave Meltzer would describe it. So this is, you know, maybe a little Stan Hansen inspired work here. What do you remember about the way your character changed here?
Yeah, and I don't think it changed. You know, I saw the report that it changed after I went to Japan. Maybe so, because, you know, you're influenced by places you work. So maybe that's true. I didn't think it was. Maybe it was. When I came in, Chief Jake pulled me aside and said, hey, we want you to work like a Stan Hansen.
Okay.
So I said, all right. So I'm under directive. I knew how Stan wrestled, but I wrestled very similar anyway. Look, big cowboys that played football, that were built a certain way, wrestled a certain way. It wasn't like we had a choice. You know, I'm not going to be a Carl Gotch, and I'm not going to be, you know, some Dean Malenko that can put a million holds. It wouldn't work for me, even if I could do it. So Chief Jay says, we want you to work like Stan Hansen. I said, okay. So they had me in the back. I was like chewing the licorice and spitting at the back of there and promos and stuff. You know, they want me to be Stan Hansen, which, by the way, I tried to bring in Stan, and Vince ixnayed it right away. Apparently there was still heat over something. I'm not sure what it was. But about 3 months later.
Well, hang on. Here in early 98, you pitched bringing Stan in?
Yeah.
And
yeah. I want to bring Stan in as a mentor. And then after the Japanese tour, I want to bring Stan in as a mentor, and then have either him turn on me or me turn on him. Probably me turn on him, I think would probably make more sense. So that must have been what it was. And then me and Stan worked toward a lariat versus clothesline match. And I asked Stan, I said, you got any heat? And he said, no, I don't think so. So I pitched it to Vince. And Lanza came to me and goes, I wouldn't pitch Stan again. He's got heat. And so I never found out what the heat was, but it got killed as soon as his name was mentioned. I'm not sure I have no idea what it was.
By the way, he did continue to wrestle through 2000, so it would have been interesting to think about.
Yeah, I had a whole storyline to bring Stan in. I thought it was great. Stan wanted to do it. People were for it, and for some reason Vince killed it. I don't know why. You know, Stan did the match with Hogan when he needed a favor
in 90. Yeah,
and Vince told him, if you ever want to work there, come see me. So I thought there was an open door, but for some reason there wasn't. And I don't know why it got killed. But Chief Jay had told me to work like Stan Hansen. And so I'm doing all this Stan Hansen stuff, which I didn't like doing, because it wasn't the work was me. That was, you know, pretty much how it worked. The chewing the back and the promos and stuff, I wasn't a big fan of that. But was doing it. And then Chief Jay comes to me about 3 months later, and he goes, hey, kid, if we want Stan Hansen, we'll bring in Stan Hansen. I'm like, you son of a bitch, you just told me to work like this guy. Now you're the one telling me that I'm making a mistake. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And so now I'm so freaking lost. I'm pissed off. I just want to quit. And I said, well, how do you want me to work? He goes, work like a heel Barry Windham. He never told me work like you work. There's always somebody. Work like a heel Barry Windham. I said, okay. So I knew that style very well. About a month later, they bring in Barry Windham. So now I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous.
It is interesting to think about Stan Hansen in the WWF. I keep thinking about that because we all know that Stan worked for Vince's dad quite a bit. And I know that Vince purchased the company from his dad and other investors in 1982. But after 1982, there were only 2 appearances where Stan was even working with the WWF, and they were both joint shows. one with International Wrestling in Quebec in 86, and then the one you referenced with Hulk Hogan in 1990 at the Tokyo Dome. But that is interesting that in an alternate universe, we could have had Dr. Death and Stan Hansen both in the WWF in 1998. Are those two of the biggest sort of what ifs in company history? I've always thought, speaking of another guy who worked that style and was a big star in Japan, Brody Hogan could have just been gangbusters for the WWF once upon a time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the two biggest what ifs. Doc, the stupid brawl for all, certainly hurt him. And Stan, I'm not sure what happened. Stan had an event with Vince Sr. where Vince Sr. was standing at the back and Stan threw something at him in the ring, like a ball or something that Vince Sr. told him not to do. And, Stan told us the story on the Foggy. He told us a couple times. He goes, and Stan would say, "Why'd I do that? That was dumb." And so there was some heat with Vince Sr., I believe, but then he filled in and did the stuff with Vince McMahon, as we know him, Jr., and Vince McMahon loved him. At least that's what Vince McMahon said and what Stan said. But I had a whole angle to bring Stan Hansen in the late 90s, and for some reason it got killed directly by Vince. I know for a fact who exactly killed it was Vince. But yeah, talk about a great unknown. And if you would have had Stan and Doc there, you would have got Kabashi Masawa. You'd have got Duncombe Jr. I mean, you would have got Albright, which I'm not sure what, I think they could have done some good stuff with Albright. But, man, you'd have got a lot of talent that came in with that.
What if, when we saw that WCW had such a great relationship with New Japan, if Vince could have really worked it out with All Japan and done a talent trade like that in 98, man, it could have looked a lot differently. Let's talk a little bit about this match, though. No Way Out in Texas. We mentioned now you're just Bradshaw. You've got the bull rope. You're going to be working Hansen style, and you're working with Jeff Jarrett, and the match gets half a star. I know sometimes guys just don't have the right chemistry. Sometimes guys are working hurt. Sometimes they get their time cut. There's lots of things that can affect the quote-unquote quality of a match.
Does that have a star out of 5 stars?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Is that like one of the lowest rated matches ever?
No. He gave Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, the one that the whole book was written about that we just talked about. I think that got like -10 stars or something like that.
You're -10?
It may have been -20, but it was negative something. He really, really hated it. And of course,
the match that created the WrestleMania era.
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
So I'm 10.5 stars better than Hogan and Giant.
Nobody would argue that.
Okay, cool.
You and Jeff Jarrett had a better match than Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, and
about 10.5 stars.
Since we're picking on Dave, Kurt Angle has yet to have a 5-star match, but we're hoping, maybe one day.
No.
Will not have. And listen, again, I know this is why people get negative on Dave, but I want to remind you, that's just the dude's opinion. Like his flavor of wrestling, it doesn't mean that it was universally not.
Conrad, wait a minute. How does he have a negative opinion of Kurt Angle?
I don't think he has a negative opinion. He just thinks that Kurt Angle has not had. Well, he's had 20 less 5-star matches than Will Ospreay. And I love Will Ospreay. Will Ospreay is arguably one of the best wrestlers in the world, if not the best wrestler in the world. I'm not critical of that. But Kurt Angle has 0? Like, come on, man. He's got some.
Yeah.
That's Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania. That's 5 stars to me.
Oh, my God. Yeah. And you would think Meltzer, who's a big fan of the wrestlers and that wrestling like that, would be all over Kurt Angle.
Well, either way, I don't want to get too sidetracked here. The critics.
I do because wait a minute. So me and Kurt Angle have got the same amount of 5-star matches.
You have the exact same number of 5-star.
I knew I was as good as Kurt.
Yeah,
and I'm 10.5 stars better than Hogan and Giant.
Yeah,
so on a 5-star scale,
your match with John Cena at WrestleMania got a better rating than Hogan Andre.
I knew it.
Hey, so let's talk about this match because I wanted to know from your perspective. It was panned critically. Was it a good match? Was it a styles clash? Did you just not have chemistry? Was the timing?
Yeah, what is panned critically? Was it one critic?
Well, I don't think the Torch loved it either. And there was a narrative out at the time, and I guess Steve Austin really helped with this. I think Steve Austin said that something about Jeff Jarrett to the likes of, watch him run the ropes. He couldn't break an egg with the way he runs the ropes. He felt like Jeff worked a softer style. And one of his heroes in wrestling was Jerry Lawler. Lawler never had a reputation for hurting people. And I think Jeff got into the business understanding, hey, longevity is the key. And by the way, let me knock on wood. I'm not going to say how old Jeff is, but let me just say he's been wrestling since 86. 0 surgeries. So he worked a safe style, or he didn't hurt anybody else, and he didn't get hurt. You are working, especially in this era, a much more aggressive style than a lot of other guys, because again, as you said, I'm trying to channel my inner Stan Hansen. Was that the styles clash, or did you think you guys had a good match and this is the first you're hearing that people didn't love it?
You know the answer to that. It's the first I've heard. I didn't read the dirt sheets. I didn't know I was so freaking bad. I thought I was okay. I mean, I thought I was like, I didn't think I was horrible.
Bad, John. He's just saying the match didn't click. And you've at least been in there and felt it, I'm sure.
Yeah. I've been in several matches that haven't clicked. I was fine with this one. And I enjoyed working with Jeff very much. And the thing about it is if guys, where they work stiff or whether they don't, it's how is the match? Lawler didn't work stiff. He sold out Memphis 52 straight weeks. That's next to impossible to do that. I mean, I'd love to have a run like that. And people say, oh, you didn't work very stiff. Nobody gives a shit if you work stiff or whether you work light. Do you draw money? And Jeff drew money. And, I think him and Steve had a little bit of a problem back then. They had a little bit of, issue over a couple things. And so maybe that's where that came from. I can't speak for Steve. Steve was a guy that was, blood and guts and, would tater you somewhere in a match. But it was fun because he didn't care what you hit him with. Jeff was, I didn't think he worked that light. I thought he was fine. I didn't think, hey, I'm working with a guy who's works really light here. I never thought that. I just thought I'm working with a really good worker.
Well, we know that when it comes to really good workers, there was perhaps no better worker when it came to being a referee than Tommy Young. And he's going to get introduced into WWE programming here by Jim Cornette. I think that's such a cool thing. It happens on Raw. They're doing it. I guess it's a taping on February 16th in Dallas at the old Reunion Arena. But it airs on the 21st. And I know, critically, we all look back and there's plenty of criticism to go around for this NWA angle. But I do appreciate that it gave guys like Tommy Young and the Rock and Roll Express an opportunity to be showcased on WWE programming in a way that they haven't been on TV in a long, long time. So even though maybe critically we didn't love it, creatively it's not the best, I'm really happy that Tommy Young and his family got to see him on Monday Night Raw, just like the Rock and Roll Express. That's cool.
Yeah, I thought it was very cool. We tried to get Tommy on our show. Tommy doesn't have internet. he's like lives way out the sticks somewhere. Doesn't have internet. So we've been trying to get him on the show for years, and hopefully we'll get him on someday. We got to figure out we got to take him to the internet wherever that is. But Tommy's one of these great referees. One of these legendary referees like Bronco Lubitsch or Bulldog Danny Pledges or these guys. And it's great to see these guys. This angle was never going to go anywhere. And, I can't say that enough. Vince was not going to let this become a big angle because that diminishes the WWE brand. Once Stone Cold comes along or The Rock comes along, they're going to squash it. And because that makes the WWE bigger. Because what happens if you take this NWA title and you try to run opposition? You never know what will happen. Like in the early 90s, did anybody think that WCW would ever compete with WWE? Of all places, they couldn't give away tickets. They had WrestleMania 3. They had all this stuff with Hogan and Warrior. Then all of a sudden Bischoff comes along and they're beating us for almost a year and a half. So you never know what might happen. So you can't put cachet into this NWA title by the way Vince thinks. So there's a ceiling here on the angle. You put some out there that's entertaining, and if something works, I can tell you what Vince would do. He took Jeff Jarrett out of it, and he put him on the Intercontinental title, WWE title on him, and then gave him a push. And if it had worked with Ricky and Robert, they've done the same thing. They take him out of there, give him a WWE run, and give him a push. Nobody's going to get a push in the NWA angle against major WWE guys. You will against Bradshaw, but you're not going to get against the main event guys.
I do want to ask, they're going to do an angle here with you on TV where they have Goldust come out sort of parodying Dusty Rhodes, and they're going to show clips of Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire. And, they even have Dustin dressed up like Dusty, and it's not very polite. He's got the fake scars on his arm and his forehead. He's got a pillow in his stomach for extra stuffing, but you're actually going to get to wrestle him. What do you remember about this angle? Because obviously you hold Dusty in high regard, but Dustin's doing his best to do a fun parody of his dad. And now you're having to wrestle a match with him. I mean, is it silly? Is it fun? Was it mean spirited? What did you think of this at the time? And what do you think about it with the benefit of hindsight?
I think all the above. I think it was silly, fun, and mean spirited. I'm not sure why they were messing with Dusty. And Dustin, he was supposed to do something at the end of that match. I can't remember what it was. He said, I ain't doing it, and left. He did everything else. Bruce did the voice of Dusty. So that was dubbed over, I believe, because I believe Bruce was the one doing the voice when they did, I think, the backstage or whatever it was. Bruce was, the one that was doing the voice. And I know Dustin, I don't think really liked it. He was a little bit estranged from his dad, but just because you're a little bit estranged, I believe he was at the time. And you know what? I don't need to say that because I'm not sure if that's true or not. But,
they were estranged. They weren't talking here.
Okay. And just because you're estranged from your dad, it's still your dad.
That's right.
And, Dustin had something at the end of it where like this sucks or something, was supposed to say that, talking about the Dusty Rhodes thing. And Dustin didn't say it. Because he wasn't going to go that far against his dad. Now, he didn't tell me that he wasn't going to say it, beforehand, but after the match, he said, I'm not going to say that. That's my dad. And I just don't think Dustin really, I don't know what the point of it was, and I don't know why they were messing with Dusty. Dusty never harmed a fly. He's such a good dude. And, he's an easy target, to go after, but because he's such a big name, but I'm not sure why they did the whole thing.
Of course, there is a skit in here that's maybe even too inside baseball. During the course of the match, the camera picks it up. He's saying to you, you'd better start letting me beat you up. Of course, the inside baseball reference to when Dusty was booking Jim Crockett Promotions and also a performer as well. So I don't know. It does feel kind of mean-spirited, kind of silly, but I could also see how it could also be at the time kind of fun.
But, if you ever saw Vince do with creative, he would come up with stuff like that. And I'm not sure if Vince even saw it as mean-spirited. And knowing him like I knew him from creative meetings, I mean, Vince all of a sudden go, hey, let's do a Dusty thing. I'll tell you what, we're going to have Dustin dress up and put a big pillow in. We're going to dress him up. And you better let me start beating you, and Vince thought that was funny. That was Vince's sense of, Vince has a really weird sense of humor. And it can be very entertaining, his sense of humor, and sometimes not. I think this was one of the times that it wasn't.
I do want to talk about something that doesn't go out of style right fast, and that's our friends at Brunt. All right, listen up, y'all. I got a new product I want to brag about that I've recently discovered. I'm talking about Brunt Workwear, and I was so impressed with their product, I couldn't wait to tell you guys about it. Choosing work boots used to mean sacrificing comfort or durability. If they felt good, they didn't last, and if they lasted, they wrecked your feet. Well, Brunt Workwear finally ended that trade-off, designing boots that withstand the toughest job sites, but also feeling as comfortable as your favorite sneakers. And much like the founder of Brunt, Eric grew up in a blue-collar family, so did I, and he started Brunt after his friends in the trades encouraged him to start a workwear brand that was truly built for them. That's why all Brunt products are named after the guys that he grew up with. How cool is that? These might be the most comfortable work boots on the planet, and they also deliver real performance on the job. If you need waterproof or maybe safety toe or soft toe or pull on or lace up, whatever you're looking for, they got you covered. And they're so confident that these boots will blow you away, they even let you try it on the job risk-free. How about that for putting your money where your mouth is? For a limited time, our listeners can get $10 off Brunt with the code WRESTLE at checkout. Just head on over to bruntworkwear.com/wrestle. Use the code WRESTLE and you're all set. Now, after you buy, do us a favor, and they're going to want to know, where'd you hear about Brunt? Let them know it was from our show, Something to Wrestle. And I want to mention, even though you can't see it right now, I'm actually wearing these boots today. We've been doing some work here at the house, and I was helping my dad in the yard, and I thought, hey, here's an excellent chance for me to do this. I want to recommend them to you too. I've got uncles and cousins and an entire family who use these products now on a regular basis, and it's all because we were introduced to it through this podcast. The same way you found out about it is the way they found out about it. And man, everybody loves their Brunt boots. By the way, it's more than just boots. They've got really cool stuff. You're going to see some cool hats and some cool workwear and some weather-resistant jackets and even heavy-duty work pants. Brunt didn't just make a durable work boot. They reinvented comfort for the hardest working men out there. And for a limited time, our listeners get 10% off Brunt by using the code WRESTLE at checkout. Just head on over to bruntworkwear.com/wrestle and use the code WRESTLE and you're all set. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you here at Something to Wrestle. Hey, I got to ask, I know you placed your order too. Have you got your Brunt boots yet? What do you think?
No, I haven't. I'm in Texas, so if I got them today, I don't know, because I just got down here to doing a beers with JBL in Waco, Texas on Thursday night. So
that's fun.
Yeah, going to tell some stories, have some fun with some old Texas friends of mine, and so I've been down here. So I have not got my Brunt boots yet.
Let's talk about the NWA here a little bit. We know that one of the next things we're going to do is we're going to spin up the idea of bringing back the Midnight Express. We're going to call them the new Midnight Express. That's Bombastic Bob and Bodacious Bart. We're repackaging half of the Smoking Guns and the former Sparky Plug Holly. Before he's hardcore, he's Bombastic Bob. Two great individual performers. Man, they made a lot of a living for a long time in the WWF. Made a lot of towns, wrestled in front of a lot of crowds. Really reliable guys, real tough guys in real life. But man, the new anything usually doesn't work. You found that out firsthand in '97 with the new Blackjacks. Now they're the new Midnight Express. Did you know this was doomed as soon as you heard the name?
100%.
Yeah,
100%. I knew they weren't going to do much with the NWA angle, and I knew the new Midnight Express. I mean, I was glad Bart and Bob were getting something on television that was going to be spotlighted a little bit, because they deserve that, but they don't deserve this. The new anything, it wasn't going to work. There's just no way that they shackled them in a gimmick that had a short shelf life, because you knew this NWA thing. Vince, when he got a shiny new toy, when that shine wore off, he was done with it. Look at what he did with any of the invasion angles, WCW, ECW, NWA. When the shine wore off, he was done. He deep sixed it. And you knew this was going to be deep sixed. And I just hated that Bob and Bart got stuck in a gimmick that you knew didn't have much shelf life, because those guys were good workers and good dudes. Really good dudes. But they were both solid, good workers. And that Bob Holly, man, that guy could work with anybody. So could Bart. But that Bob, I worked with Bob so many more times. Worked with Bart a ton too. But it was. We were in Vegas one time. I was working against Bart and the Godwins, and they had Clarence Mason. Remember the manager?
Oh yeah.
I think he was with me, because I was with Davey and Owen, and we're in a 6-man tag in Vegas. And the Godwins used to torture Clarence, torture him. He sold like crazy, so they're always trying to find ways to, get him at ringside or something. He gets up on the belt, and I'm sitting there looking at Bart Gunn, and Clarence Mason is tired of the Godwins messing with him. So he stands on the apron, he holds up the titles, and that big Henry Godwin hit the rope by Clarence Mason, and it launched him all the way into the crowd. So he hits the rope, and the rope hits, Godwin, is massive guy, and he ran the ropes as hard as any human being I've ever seen. And he hit those ropes, and that back rope hit Clarence Mason, and the titles go flying into the crowd. Clarence Mason went all the way over the rail. It was hilarious.
I love hearing about the good old days of professional wrestling. We hope you guys too. We hope you're hitting that subscribe button, turn on that notifications bell. You don't want to miss us the next time we're live. But I'm glad that you're live here with us, because there was a report that came out in January of '98, or maybe it was February of '98. You actually got hospitalized for a few days. You had a bad left knee, is the way it's written about. And I guess it got so bad that your entire leg was discolored. Maybe there was fear you had some sort of a blood clot. Now, the only time I've heard about a bad blood clot in wrestling, we know tragically, was Chris Candido. What was going on with your leg? Why were you hospitalized here?
I wasn't hospitalized. I had no idea what they're talking about. I read the same thing, and I tried to go through my dates and all that stuff. I don't remember. I was never in the hospital.
Boy, this is not a banner day for our buddy Dave.
I don't know what he's talking about, and I hate to say definitively 100% that he's wrong, but I don't remember being in the hospital at all during that time. And I would have remembered because I just signed a new contract. So it wasn't, I had a point where I missed a show somewhere because of a hip issue, but it was, I never had a leg issue. I was never hospitalized.
Well, all righty. Let's talk a little bit about how we're trying to evolve this story.
That's strange. To say something like that, especially it had to be written at the time. So something had to say that, I don't remember that being a storyline issue. I don't remember anything, but I certainly never was worried about a blood clot or anything like that. And I have had tons of surgeries on my left leg, but I was never in hospital for a knee surgery or discolored leg or anything like that.
Well, we're going to limp along and have sort of a pre-show opportunity to throw in a bunch of makeshift NWA guys on WrestleMania, but by the spring, it's pretty clear that this is not going to be a successful situation for this NWA angle. The Observer would write about it on the issue dated May 11th. Jim Cornette's angle with Dan Severn was twofold. The decision was made to get Severn away from Cornette for whatever reason, and they injured Cornette to explain his absence from TV for a few weeks while he went on vacation. Neither Cornette nor Severn knew of the angle until the night it was done, and the explanation that was given was that Vince Russo had given McMahon a list of all the faces and heels on the roster, and as you could imagine, it's heavily weighed on the heel side, and they need to get some heels onto the face side. Well, Cornette will return on May 11th and will still head the NWA group and manage the Midnight Express. But when Severn appeared on Raw last week, the NWA title was never mentioned, and he was told not to wear the belt when he went to the ring, which puts him in a bad position since he still does NWA shows as its champion, and it's not being acknowledged on TV that it kills its credibility. So let's just time out right there. It feels like to me, when we have Dan Severn stop wearing the NWA World title to the ring on May 4th, and on May 11th, Cornette is back after being off for a bit, managing the Midnight Express, but he's been gone for a few weeks. If you had a hot angle, the guy wouldn't be gone for a few weeks. If you had high hopes for this thing in the future, he wouldn't stop wearing the NWA title. That's sort of the writing on the wall that this thing's dead by May of 98, right?
100%. Absolutely 100%. And what they're doing with Severn here is they're not hurting him. They're helping him. It's completely opposite of what was written. They're hoping that he's going to be able to get over, and they think that NWA title is hamstringing him, which it 100% is. Vince is not going to push the NWA champion over any of his WWE champions, period. I don't care what he's doing all over the world on the independents. That doesn't exist to Vince. This isn't the age of like now with the internet where everything that's going on. You don't know a lot of this stuff going on. And Vince was just not going to acknowledge it. And what Vince was doing here was actually giving Severn a push of, hey, let's get the NWA title off of him so we can give him a push. Forget all about that stuff with what's going on. And let's see what we can do with this UFC champion, one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time. So this was completely opposite of what was written. This was not something that hurt him. This was something they were doing to help him.
We fast forward to King of the Ring, and there's an unannounced match on the pay-per-view with the New Age Outlaws beating the Midnight Express. Of course, the New Age Outlaws are the tag team champs, and they're hotter than donut grease, as JR might say, in the summer of 1998. And the Midnights are at least acknowledged as being the NWA tag team champions, but Meltzer would say the NWA gimmick is gone, and they are basically the lowest level jobber team on the roster. They did acknowledge Billy and Bart's former incarnation as wrestling brothers. The match was fairly solid athletically, but the fans just didn't care. Yeah, it does look like it's sort of the end of the line. And, of course, we know that by July, just a couple of weeks later, that's when we're starting the Brawl for All. And at that point, the NWA and the whole angle is officially dead. In an alternate universe, could an NWA invasion angle have worked at any point? We know in 1998, that's not it. but being a wrestling junkie like you and I are, do you think this could have worked in 88 rather than 98? Like, if Vince had made the play that Ted Turner did, and he buys Jim Crockett Promotions, but by doing that, in theory, he gets that television slot back on TBS or TNT. If he would have done that, I guess it was just TBS back then. If he would have done that in 88 and he picks up the pieces where Ted Turner did, could an NWA Invasion angle have worked back then? Because we know the challenge with WCW is he couldn't get all the big money players over because they had Turner contracts and it behooved them to sit outside. I don't think there were a bunch of rich contracts he wanted to avoid that are on separate deals. And I don't think all of those hurdles existed in 88. We saw what happened with the NWA Invasion angle of 98. Do you think, John, it could have worked in 88?
No, absolutely not. And no chance because of Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
Vince, even if he owns the NWA, he's not going to come in there and eventually put the NWA champion over the WWE championship because it validates that that's a better organization. That's the way Vince looks at it. 100%. This was never going to work. An invasion angle was never going to work. You look at what WCW did when you had Hall and Nash and then Hogan invade. You had three of the biggest stars of all time. And their three biggest stars, all due respect to Sting and Luger and all the guys, but, at least those guys matched up with any other stars they had. Whether they were bigger or not, that's subjective. You had the huge stars that led the invasion. In NWA, you did not. You didn't have Stone Cold. You didn't have Rock. They weren't even involved in the angle except for Stone Cold to shit on it at one point, come out and stun Jeff and do the strut. You didn't have Taker. You didn't have Shawn. You didn't have Brett. You didn't have any of those guys. And so you look at the importance of the NWA, it was a mid-card angle at best. And you weren't going to beat any good mid-carders. You were going to put me out there. You're going to put Bradshaw out there and see what happens. And if there's a chance I get over, then, hey, we'll put Bradshaw in the Intercontinental title picture. Jeff gets over, which he did. We'll put him in their Intercontinental title, which they did. But he was a WWE guy at that point. There is no way an invasion angle would ever work with Vince McMahon.
Well, we've learned that the hard way through the years. We greatly appreciate you guys joining us for our conversation.
Hey, Conrad, don't you think he's right about that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I do too. You've got your product that people have believed in all these years, and all of a sudden, if you find out another product was better, it kind of ruins everything you thought for your entire life. And so that to me was Vince's thinking, and I always thought he was right about that.
But it is interesting to jump into that guy's mind because according to the rumor and innuendo, the plan was after he bought WCW, he wanted to make the Monday show Nitro and he wanted to make the Thursday show Raw. So Monday Night Raw would have been Thursday Night Raw and it still would have been Monday Night Nitro. Now, granted, Vince owns them both, but the idea that Nitro came behind Raw was the Monday night innovator. I mean, when Eric announced that we were going head to head with WWE on TNT, and people thought that was crazy. I mean, Paul Heyman was like, this will not last. This is going to fizzle out. This is a mistake. I mean, almost every talking head in the business said, this is a bad idea. Literally pick any other day on the calendar, any other day of the week. Why would you go head to head with the biggest one? And it worked. But I do find it interesting that while we all sort of know Vince is thinking of, hey, the WWF is the bigger product, these fans aren't familiar. We heard that from Bruce all the time on this program. It does feel like there was an about face. We never saw it, but we heard about it in 2001. Oh no, WCW Nitro will be the Monday show. Did you ever believe that would actually happen, or did you always know Vince would change his mind?
I always knew Vince would change his mind. I would have bet everything I had Vince would have changed his mind. And I'm not sure if Vince did anything more than give that a little bit of lip service. I don't believe any of that. I believe Vince said it, and I heard him talk about it. And I remember when we had the ECW pay-per-view, we put those guys over like crazy. But by then we had pretty much owned the company, or did own it at the time.
Yeah, that's right.
And I said, Vince, you understand? We're leveraging our whole company. We're putting these guys over with everybody. And I said, is this what you want? And he said, yep. I said, okay, cool. And but it was different because we owned it, but we had all their top stars.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different dynamic with ECW in 2004, 2005, because we had all their top stars, these great stars that ECW had made. We didn't have that with WCW. We had Booker and we had Dallas, We had a few other guys that were great hands. Sean O'Hare and Palumbo, those guys were terrific workers, but we didn't get the NWO.
Right.
We didn't get Brett. We didn't get any of those guys. So I just don't think it would ever work. And if you don't get those guys, then they're not going to go up against our top guys either. You look at the invasion angle in WCW, who was the lead against it? Again, me and Ron. Me and Ron were the big ones spearheading the old charge, and Ron and I weren't low card guys, but we weren't your main event guys either. And I did pretty much all the invasion angles, but I wasn't Stone Cold. You weren't getting Steve for this. And because of that, you could look at it and say, it's not going to work. Look at WWE now. Bring guys in. They're not going over Roman and Cody, for good reason, because then you diminish your product and what people have believed in for all these years. And so I think that's the same thing with WCW in 2001.
Well, we greatly appreciate all your time this morning. I had a blast chopping it up and talking about this failed NWA invasion. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Beers with Bradshaw, but I also want to learn a little bit more about what you got going on with baseball. I know opening season was last weekend. Of course, we're knee deep in the NCAA tournament. Tennessee and Alabama were eliminated, but Duke and Houston roll on. So does Florida and Auburn. It's a hot time to be a sports betting fan. And you're having a little fun with that these days, right, John?
Holy cow. I'm winning like crazy right now. I don't know if I can keep doing that, but I'm doing 5 best bets, but I'm doing 5 best bets for 4 different things on a baseball. So I'm betting 20 bets a day in baseball. That's the video I'm putting out. 5 best bets of sides, 5 best bets of totals, 5 best bets of runs first inning, and then 5 best bets of props. So I'm putting out at least 20 bets a day with baseball. And so far after 4 days, I'm up, I think 12 units, which is just insane how much I'm up. If you add in the Tokyo series, I'm up about 16 units in baseball. I haven't had a losing day yet. And, I'm probably going to jinx myself and go 0-20 today. But things right now are really, I've been killing it. It's been shocking at how much I've won. I'm not that good. So it's a lot of luck, but hopefully, luck goes your way sometimes. Luck doesn't go your way sometimes. But fortunately, so far, luck has gone my way. But I love baseball. I love betting on baseball. Everything about baseball. I watch it all the freaking time. I watch baseball 24/7 when it's on because I enjoy it. And so far, 5 best bets has been doing great.
By the way, I want to mention that's not something that we're selling to you. We're not trying to sell you a betting handicap service. We're not trying to you to a specific betting site. John is just a real life enthusiast of this. And I can't tell you how many times we've been scheduled to do a conference call and he has to step out because he's at his gaming rig, his betting rig. And he's like, hang on, let me get outside here. He loves it and he's having a lot of fun with it. And he's a fun follow. I know 14 million of you are blocked, but there's about
that's right.
You'll go find him on social. He's going to be posting and talking about this. And he spends a lot of time talking about all the different yesteryear of wrestling. He has a great podcast with Jerry Briscoe. It comes out every week called Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. They've had over 300 guests through the years, and they've got a lot of great ones coming up. Go join them. Check out the archives. It's totally free anywhere you enjoy podcasts. If you can't get enough JBL, get a little more at Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. Hey, man, I appreciate all the time. I hope that you and Mom have a good time, and y'all have a blast at Beers with Briscoe and Bradshaw this Thursday.
Thanks, Conrad. Looking forward to it. This first time I'm doing it alone. Ron's not with me, but want to do a kind of a show down here alone to make sure I've kind of got the system right and the presentation right, and then bring Ron in for the next one. So this is going to be a lot of fun down here in Texas.
Go see John in Waco this Thursday and stay tuned next week right here on Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. and you want to talk about early, you can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus, ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.